Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
Chapter 26, The Subway Station. September 28th, Raccoon City, 5:30 p.m. John's order was an imperative, not a suggestion. While Evelyn and Leo went upstairs to pack the essentials, a backpack for her, Leo's hand as her anchor, John moved with brutal efficiency through Kendo's gun shop. He wasted no time on sentimentality. He headed to the backroom storage, a place Kendo had kept well-stocked even in peacetime. John took the boxes labeled 9mm, 5.56 by 45mm, for his Colt Commando, and .45 ACP, for his pistols, ripping open the cartons with the tip of a combat knife and filling every pocket and sheath on his suit with preloaded magazines. The weight of the ammunition was reassuring, the sound of metal clanking against metal was the only language that mattered now. His suit felt heavier, but safer. Kendo, returning with a dark backpack and a loaded pump-action shotgun, watched the machinery in motion. 10 minutes, you said, he muttered. Enough time to arm ourselves, John replied breathlessly, finishing securing his MP5 to his bandolier. The kids are ready. Yeah, Evelyn only took her teddy bear and I grabbed some canned food and water. What's the plan now? The Hummer, Kendo asked, referring to the imposing vehicle John had left parked precariously in front of the store. John nodded, his face grim. We'll take the armored vehicle. It's the fastest and safest. I left it halfway across the street so it would be easier to start. It should be. John stopped. He had reached the store's front door, the one that faced the street. His gaze swept over the exact spot where he had left the Hummer H1. The vehicle was gone. In its place, there was only an empty space between two overturned cars, with fresh tire marks on the broken pavement, turning toward the main avenue. John stood motionless for a second. There was no room for surprise, only for cold rage. Damn it, John hissed, the strongest curse he had articulated since the nightmare began. His voice was an icy whisper, but the intensity was palpable. Kendo looked at the empty street. No way, a survivor took it, now. Someone saw the armored vehicle, the weapon, and took the opportunity, John retorted. It doesn't matter, we go on foot now. Kendo gripped the shotgun harder. On foot, John, the subway station, it's about 5 blocks from here. On foot, right now, it's a slaughterhouse. We're losing light. The faint sunlight was no longer enough. Twilight had dissolved into an early darkness, broken only by distant fires and the flickering streetlights that had survived. The shadows were long, deep, and treacherous. John Wick turned to look at Kendo. His face, barely visible in the gloom, was a mask of determination. Staying here is a slaughterhouse with a roof. Moving fast, in the dark, is an advantage, John explained, his voice low and efficient, like a tactical report. The night covers us, it will make us harder to detect. But we must be silent. Any noise, any cry, is an invitation. He paused, looking toward where the children were waiting by the staircase entrance. Listen to me, Kendo. This is a formation. My position is the spearhead. You are the shield. John took the lead, his MP5 pointed forward, covering the widest field of view. Leo, Evelyn, you stay between Kendo and me. Nobody gets more than an arm's length away, John instructed, without raising his voice. He addressed the children with a tone that was calm but demanded absolute obedience. If you hear a sound, if you see anything, don't scream. Keep your mouth shut and move. Understood. Evelyn, clinging to her backpack in Leo's hand, nodded sharply. Leo, his eyes wide in the dark, nodded too. John turned to Kendo, who had taken his place behind the children, his shotgun covering the rear. I clear the way, you cover our backs. If you see anything moving, only shoot if it's an immediate threat. And aim for the head. Clear. Clear, John, Kendo responded, his voice low and grave. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by the focus of a father defending his young. The shop door, half destroyed, was slowly pushed open by John. The street was a silent maze of abandoned vehicles and rubble, bathed in the unsettling reddish glow of Raccoon City's night. The air was cold and smelled of smoke and death. John stepped out first, his silhouette absorbing the meager light. He began a slow, almost hypnotic movement, scanning the rooftops and shadows. Kendo followed, his eyes fixed on the rear. He felt the small bodies of Evelyn and Leo, one ahead and one beside, moving rhythmically. The formation was a delicate sandwich of human flesh and steel, advancing street by street, moving into the night. 5 blocks. The journey to the subway station had begun. The factor of low light, which added distress and mystery for Kendo and the children, was a tactical blessing for John, allowing them to move like ghosts through hell. The chaos wasn't limited to screams, it was the architecture of destruction. Each step was a challenge, a silent climb over broken bricks, ground glass, and ripped-off car doors. Raccoon City had become an urban charnel house. On the first street, John had to guide the formation around an overturned bus that was bleeding fuel onto the pavement. The darkness was so dense that the colossal buildings looked like mute ghosts on either side. 2 streets in, the silence of John's tactic was broken by the reality of the threat. 4 figures staggered into the middle of the street, drawn not by sound, but by the faint crunch of Kendo's boots stepping on a puddle of putrid liquid. 2 to the left, 2 to the front. Slow, but coming, John hissed without moving his head, his voice a thread of cold air. Kendo tensed his muscles. He knew a shotgun blast here would be a sonic disaster, attracting the entire block. John drew his silenced P30L pistol, a weapon he knew intimately. Without stopping the advance, and using Kendo's movements as a distraction for the infected, John fired. Peef, peef, 2 muffled sounds. 2 silhouettes dropped without a moan, their heads perforated by the 9mm rounds. The other 2 infected, oblivious to the death that had just passed, continued their drag. John waited for them to pass a recycling bin and executed the remaining 2 with the same cold efficiency. Keep going. Fast, but quiet, John ordered. The children, terror frozen on their faces, moved. Evelyn clung to her father, feeling the tremor of Leo's hand in hers. John and Kendo were now a lethal pair, John clearing the vanguard, Kendo watching to ensure no one got up from behind. Everything seemed to be going according to John's plan. They had already passed 3 streets and the 4th was close to completion. Kendo's nervousness began to turn into a tense hope, the silhouette of the subway sign, though dimmed and broken, shone in the distance with the reflection of a fire. They were getting close. It was then, halfway down the 4th street, that the darkness betrayed them. A low, quick growl, different from the guttural moan of the infected, was heard echoing off the alleyway. John, who was in the lead, stopped the formation dead in its tracks, raising an open hand. The scant light reflecting off the debris allowed John to see the ground-level movement, a pack, or what was left of one. They were dogs, but their eyes glowed like incandescent coals, a demonic red that cut through the gloom. They moved with terrifying speed and intelligence. Damn it, John swore in his thoughts, an instant coldness running down his spine. These were a much bigger problem. The undead were slow and predictable. These creatures were fast, relentless, and probably guided by superior smell and hearing. They were too fast to dodge and too numerous for a silent confrontation. Quickly, John identified a narrow alley to his right, next to a crumbling building. There was a large, metallic industrial dumpster against the wall. John slid backward, nearing Kendo and the children, his voice reduced to an urgent, clipped whisper. Kendo, listen, they're dogs, they're coming through the alley and they're too fast. If we use the shotgun, the noise will kill us. We can't risk it. I need the kids to get into that metal dumpster right now. It's temporary, but it will cover them while we clear the way. Kendo assimilated the order in half a second. Got it, Evelyn, come on, it's now. Evelyn, hearing the word, dogs, and seeing the enormous dumpster, went rigid. No, Dad, I don't want to get in there. Her voice was a small whimper. Kendo instantly knelt down, grabbing his daughter by the shoulders. His voice, tense with urgency, was her pillar of calm. Evelyn, listen to me. You have to be very brave, my love. It's for 1 minute. It's the only place you'll be safe while we take care of them. We won't be long, I promise. The girl looked at John, then at her father. She was terrified, but the conviction in Kendo's voice was undeniable. Leo didn't wait. The boy slipped under Kendo's arm and scrambled over the edge of the dumpster with John's help, disappearing silently inside. His obedience was an act of pure logic, detached from panic. Seeing Leo, Evelyn gave in. Kendo helped her climb, and Evelyn dropped down among the garbage bags and cardboard. John carefully closed the lid, his mind already focused on the approaching growl. He moved to cover the corner of the alley, the MP5 raised, ready for the assault. Kendo, shotgun ready, stood shoulder to shoulder with him. The air filled with the acrid stench of carrion and wet fur. John pressed against the wall, using the faint light of a distant street lamp to locate the most distracted target. About 50 meters away, at the mouth of the alley, an infected dog was frantically feeding on a body. The distance was extreme for a pistol shot in the dark, and the risk of missing and alerting the rest of the pack was unacceptable. John raised his silenced P30L. He didn't use the sight, but muscle memory, aligning the barrel with the center mass of the moving silhouette. He inhaled slowly and deeply, exhaling a fraction of the air, locking the rest in his lungs as his finger tensed on the trigger. For a brief moment, the outside world ceased to exist, only the point between the gun's sight and the target remained. Peef! The sound was a release of compressed air. The dog that was feeding stopped. Without a whimper, its head dropped heavily onto the corpse. There was no alert. But the pack was already moving. The slight change in the wind carried the fresh smell of gunpowder, the sweat of tension, and, worse, the scent of human flesh that the children and Kendo had just left by moving. 4 pairs of red eyes rose in the darkness and, with a guttural howl, broke into a run. "They're coming," Kendo shouted, his voice tense as he raised the shotgun. The dogs were a blur of fury and claws, their speed belying their putrefied bodies. John did not hesitate. He drew his second silenced pistol, the MP5 on his back, and moved with deadly fluidity. The first dog leapt in a low arc. John didn't shoot it, he dodged it, spinning his body so the creature passed him. The instant the dog hit the ground, John shot it in the base of the skull with a shot that shattered the bone. The second dog focused on Kendo. The man, though armed, was slower. He tried to raise the shotgun, but the animal was already airborne. Kendo covered his face with his forearm. Before the jaws could close, John lunged, stepping between the attack and Kendo. He used his forearm, reinforced by the Kevlar suit, to deflect the bite, feeling a brutal impact. Without a whimper of pain, John used the dog's weight against it. He hurled it against the wall of the dumpster where the children were hiding. The metallic crash of the dog against the steel was deafening and echoed down the street. "Now, Kendo," John hissed, freeing himself from the grip of the dog which, stunned, tried to get up. That hit and John's intervention were the spark Kendo needed. Recovering, with his heart pounding in his temples, Kendo aimed the shotgun at the stunned dog. Boom! The roar of the pump-action shotgun shattered the silence of Raccoon City. An explosion of lead and blood. The dog was pulverized in a red cloud against the dumpster. The noise was a death sentence for tranquility, but an act of survival. The sound alerted 2 more dogs that joined the fray, but they were now disoriented by the blast. John took advantage of the sonic chaos. He slid onto the pavement, an armed ghost, his P30L firing with inhumane elegance. One dog took 2 quick, precise shots to the head. The other, trying to flank Kendo, was intercepted by 3 shots to the neck and chest. The confrontation lasted 10 seconds, but for Kendo, it felt like an eternity. When the last growl died out, only the inert bodies remained and the dull echo of the shotgun blast bouncing off the buildings. John got up, his suit barely dirty, his eyes scanning the street. The smoke from Kendo's shot was the only sign of battle. "The noise," John said, his voice barely audible. "It's going to cost us 2 more minutes of slow movement." He approached the dumpster and tapped the lid softly. "We're clear. Get out slowly, now." The metallic lid lifted with a jarring screech, a protest of metal against the newly recovered silence. Leo was the first to emerge, driven by blind obedience, closely followed by Evelyn, who clutched her backpack. Both froze at the edge of the dumpster, not from fear of the darkness, but from the reality of what had occurred in the last 10 seconds. The air was still thick with the smell of gunpowder and, now, with the stench of fresh blood, viscera, and the chemical scent of John's clean work. Leo saw the dogs' bodies, most with clean, mortal holes, but his eyes fixed on the impact of Kendo's shotgun, chunks of fur and dark flesh scattered grotesquely on the metal of the dumpster and the pavement. The boy's stomach, which had already endured the shock of the previous combat, could not withstand the assault on his senses. He turned to the wall, doubling over, and vomited loudly, the acrid sound of acid hitting the cement. Kendo reacted immediately. He crouched down, dropping the shotgun to one side so he could embrace Leo. He gave him firm, soothing pats on the back as the boy emptied his stomach. "It's okay, champ, it's over. Just breathe, inhale, exhale." Evelyn, on the other hand, remained motionless. Her lips were pressed into a tight line, her eyes fixed on a dead point between her father and John. She was pale, trembling slightly, but actively refusing to look at the remains of the dogs. Her survival mechanism was visual denial, an emotional fortress that surprised Kendo in the midst of the crisis. She clung to her backpack as if it were an anchor in a storm. While Kendo comforted his adopted daughter, John did not waste a second. He quickly reloaded the magazine of his P30L. His face, devoid of emotion, assessed the scene. The roar of the shotgun, though it saved their lives, had been a sonic beacon in the night. "Fast," John said, his voice low but urgent, looking toward the mouth of the street. "We have to run. The sound we made was too much. This will draw dozens." Just as he finished the sentence, his eyes, trained to see movement where there was only darkness, detected the silhouette. Several infected were stumbling at the entrance of the 4th Street, drawn by the echo of the shot. They were slow, but their number was alarming, and the response time was ending. Kendo stood up, his expression hardened. He scooped Evelyn up in a single movement, carrying her against his chest. "Hold on tight, princess. Daddy's got you." John approached Leo. The boy, exhausted and his mouth tasting of bile, looked up. John, without a word, simply lifted him with one hand under his armpits, holding him against his side, holding the child as if he were a precision rifle. Both men ran, John taking the lead, his MP5 now in a firing position. They moved fast, Kendo holding Evelyn firmly, John shielding Leo, using his own body as a protective barrier. The children instinctively closed their eyes, burying their faces in the men's clothes. They didn't want to see the approaching figures, the ones that were dragging themselves, with broken limbs hanging limply and parts of exposed bone shining horribly in the dim light. The desperate race toward the subway station had begun. They had barely advanced 10 meters when John's tactic fell apart. The distant moans quickly amplified. 3 infected burst out of a cross alley to their left, directly intercepting their path. John did not hesitate. There was no time to stop, nor to use the suppressor. "Leo, cover your ears," John commanded with a firm shout, without slowing his run. The boy, clinging to John's side like a kangaroo, immediately obeyed, pressing his small hands against his ears. John shifted his grip on his MP5, keeping the barrel low so as not to aim at Kendo, and executed a controlled 3-shot burst. The bodies of the 3 infected twitched, their heads exploding in the gloom. Firing accurately, while moving, while carrying additional weight, was a ballistic feat that only a killer of his caliber could achieve with such calmness. "Hold tight to my back, now," John hissed at Leo, slowing down just enough for the child to wrap his arms around his neck, securing his position with his legs around John's waist. John used the brief respite to reload the MP5 in the harness with a speed the darkness could barely catch. Kendo was in the same situation. 2 more infected, noticeably more agile than average, came out of a gap on the right, getting dangerously close to Kendo's flank. Kendo stopped, using the momentum of the run to pivot. Evelyn, eyes closed and ears covered, now. The girl, who was accustomed to her father's commands, instantly complied, burying her face against Kendo's shoulder and closing her eyes. KCHICK. The sound of the shotgun's cycling mechanism resonated. Kendo aimed and fired twice in quick succession. Boom, boom. The shots were not as clean as John's, and the infected did not die, but the massive impact of the shotgun pellets brutally hurled them to the ground, their bodies broken and unable to quickly get up. It was enough. "Go, go." Kendo ran again, with Evelyn still firmly held over his shoulder. Finally, at the end of the street, the imposing structure appeared, the entrance to the South Raccoon City subway station. A gray, dirty brick marquee, with the main sign hanging crookedly and flickering from a short circuit. Beneath it, steep metal stairs welcomed them to the underground darkness. John stopped at the edge of the stairs and gently lowered Leo, making sure the boy was steady on his feet. Kendo did the same with Evelyn. John looked over his shoulder at the street. The initial group of infected he had seen had tripled. They were moving very slowly, but the mass was approaching, unstoppable. "Hurry, down, now," John ordered, pushing the children toward the stairs, covering their rear with the MP5 while Kendo and the children descended. The group quickly sank into the cement and darkness. The metal subway door, though ajar and grimy, offered the illusion of a barrier. The journey on foot was over, but the underground hell was just beginning. The descent was an immediate relief for the children. The underground air was cool and stagnant, a reprieve from the stench of the surface. The sonic chaos transformed into a muffled silence, broken by an unexpected noise, a murmur of voices, a collective sound of many people, which amplified as they descended the stairwell tunnel. Kendo stopped on the last step, his face illuminated by a surge of hope. "John, do you hear that? There are more people. The train is probably waiting for all possible survivors." It's an evacuation. We made it. John simply nodded, his gaze sweeping the shadows and ceilings, unable to lower his guard. His training told him that collective security was fragile, but the presence of other living humans was, undeniably, an advantage. Evelyn and Leo, leaving the nightmare of the streets behind, also felt relief. The atmosphere was less chaotic, more controlled. Reaching the station floor, the scene was a tapestry of human desperation. The weak, yellow emergency light revealed a large crowd of people scattered across the platform where the train was supposed to be waiting. It was a diverse group: injured people, others silently sobbing, mothers cradling trembling children, and men with stone faces, clinging to anything that could be used as a weapon. Most of the survivors were immersed in their own misery or exhaustion, ignoring the arrival of John and the others, which allowed them to enter without causing a stir. Robert Kendo, an older man, with a wrinkled face and gray hair, approached Kendo. He was wearing a dirty flannel shirt and had an arm crudely bandaged. "Larry, I thought you wouldn't make it here. I'm glad to see you," Kendo greeted his regular customer with forced cordiality. Evelyn and Leo stood still, watching curiously. For them, it was the first time they had seen so many living people since the outbreak began. "Did the train arrive, Larry? Is it waiting?" Kendo asked, the urgent question on everyone's mind. Larry sighed, a heavy, disappointed sound. "Yes, Robert, it arrived, but about 2 hours ago. It left full, to the brim. We had to leave a lot of people out. Those of us who remain here are the stragglers or those who couldn't get on. But they said the train will come back. So, we have to wait." Kendo let out a sigh of relief tinged with frustration. The train had narrowly escaped, but the promise that it would return was a lifeline. Saying goodbye to Larry, Kendo, John, and the children headed toward the platform wall, a less crowded area. They could finally sit down and rest after the exhausting journey. Kendo hugged Evelyn, cradling her against him. Leo nestled silently between John and Kendo. John leaned against the cold wall, his inscrutable gaze still scanning the group of survivors, the tunnel, and the darkness he had left behind on the stairs. With an almost imperceptible movement, he touched his forearm. The spot was bruised and pulsed with a dull ache. It was the spot where the infected dog had bitten him before he hurled it against the dumpster. The Kevlar suit had protected his flesh, it hadn't broken the skin, but the brutal squeeze he felt against his bones was a physical reminder of the creature's inhuman strength. The wait had begun. While John, Kendo, and the children found a respite underground, 2 kilometers away, a deep black armored Humvee different from the stolen Hummer H1 tore across the broken pavement of Fifth Avenue. Aboard were not 3, but 7 soldiers from the Umbrella Security Service (USS). They were packed into the cab in the rear, a concentrated assault force. Their uniforms were black ballistic material, with no visible insignia beyond a subtle embroidered umbrella logo. Most disturbing were their faces, hidden behind gas masks with bright red visor lenses, reflecting the distant flames like demonic eyes. The driver, known as Viper, spoke without emotion, his voice metallic and filtered by the respirator. "Position report. We are 1.5 kilometers from the objective, Hunter. Infected traffic is light, mostly on foot. The main horde is converging on the store area." The commanding officer, known as Hunter, the squad leader, was in the co-pilot seat, a man of unwavering presence who kept an H&K 416 assault rifle on his lap. His voice, grave and authoritative, resonated in the cab. "Confirmed. Maintain speed. We need to secure the south subway station entrance before it gets completely dark. Maintain. Whisper, alert level. No unnecessary civilian casualties before reaching the station." From the rear, a distinct voice, from a support soldier named Echo, joined the conversation via the internal intercom. "Hunter, intelligence is confused about the main objective. Are we looking for survivors or a BOW threat at the extraction point?" "Both," Hunter replied with surgical coldness. "Shadow, confirm the colonel's order." Shadow, the communications specialist, who was in the center seat, checked his console. Confirming intelligence. The subway station was used as an evacuation point. The train that left about 2 hours ago was overloaded and managed to escape the city perimeter. The order is clear, the escape is a Delta-level containment failure. Viper sharply turned the wheel to avoid an overturned car. The order is clear, Hunter. Total elimination. All survivors in the subway station, as well as any stragglers who arrive, must be neutralized to prevent exposure. The train will return, or at least that's what they were led to believe. We want the rally point to remain attractive. Another soldier in the rear, Hammer, whose specialty was heavy weaponry, intervened with a grunt. What if they resist? Or what if the train brings something more than civilians? Hunter leaned back, feeling the slight rattle of the Humvee under his boots. If they resist, they are eliminated with lethal fire. If the train brings BOWs, they are eliminated the same way. This is a cleanup job, not a battle. We will proceed with caution. We don't want to attract the federal forces already prowling the suburbs. Shadow adjusted his rifle. Understood. Neutralization and securing of the subway evacuation point. No witnesses. The returning train will not find anyone alive. Hunter ended the conversation with a final command. Prepare yourselves. We are reaching the mouth of the subway. Hammer, Lance, perimeter containment deployment. The rest of you, with me. Maximum discretion from now on. The 7 soldiers remained silent, the only evidence of their imminent arrival being the grave roar of the diesel engine, a sound that would soon blend with the darkness of Raccoon City. Chapter 27, Incident. September 28, Raccoon City. 6:30 p.m. The group was huddled against the cold concrete wall of the subway station, a dead corner off the main platform. The emergency light, dim and flickering, painted the collective despair in yellow and gray tones. Kendo, exhausted and with his heart still pounding from the run, held Evelyn close to his chest, his body serving as a shield against the fear and the dirt of the floor. Evelyn, eyes closed, clung to her teddy bear, trying to silence the outside world. Leo sat between John and Kendo, his small hand touching John's boot. The boy, after the vomiting episode, was in a state of near catatonic stillness, absorbing the silence and security that John's body provided. John Wick wasn't resting. He was still, yes, but his mind was a silent engine processing information. His MP5 remained secured to his chest. Sitting with his knees drawn up, the tension in his shoulders was the only physical evidence of his constant state of alert. He scanned the tunnel and the crowd. Safety was an illusion. The subway was a rat trap. If the metal door failed or if the train didn't return, desperation would turn into violence. It was then that danger stopped crawling and began to whisper. John felt the change first in the eyes. They were not the empty, irrational eyes of an infected, but human eyes, filled with concentrated hatred and terror. It had been as subtle as a change in air pressure. At first, it was just a middle-aged woman, sobbing in a corner, who looked up and fixed her gaze on John. Then a man with a bandaged arm stopped talking to his wife and turned around. The collective murmur on the platform began to transform, the energy of the crowd slowly moving, like a silent tide, toward them. John narrowed his eyes. His ears, fine-tuned to catch the click of a gun or the growl of a creature, caught the first sentence. That's him. Look at him. That face. Another murmur, more audible. The killer. The one from the school. The name of the massacre site, the place that had made him the lead story in the news just before Raccoon City fell, spread like a spark in gasoline. The man sitting across from John, who had been calm moments before, now stared at him with clenched teeth. Murderer. The scream was sharp and echoed off the tunnel's vaulted ceilings. It was the middle-aged woman. She stood up, limping, and pointed a trembling finger at John. You're the one from the news. The one who killed all those children. The panic, the rage, the guilt of an entire dying city found a perfect scapegoat. John Wick was a monster they had heard about. For the people in the subway, consumed by fear and helplessness, it didn't matter if the T-virus outbreak had begun. He was the personification of the chaos that had devoured them. Several people stood up. The man with the bandaged arm raised a piece of metal rebar. Get out of here, demon. We don't want you near our children, shouted the man with the rebar, his voice raspy with fear. Kendo, instantly, got to his feet, his shotgun raised. He stood between John and the approaching crowd. His face, though visibly frightened, was filled with a protective fury. Calm down. Step back. He's a survivor just like you. Kendo shouted, his voice trying to sound authoritative. He's not a survivor. He's an animal. Look at his face. He caused that massacre at the school. The woman retorted, her face covered in tears and snot. If it wasn't for him, my nephew. John didn't move. His posture didn't change, his eyes still scanning the crowd, but not as enemies, but as crazed variables in a defensive equation. He knew he couldn't shoot. Killing an innocent civilian here would be his end, not only morally but practically. They were about 70 people or maybe more. The man with the metal rebar took a step forward. Drop the weapon, murderer. You have no right to be here. Kendo raised the shotgun and aimed. Don't come any closer. I swear I'll shoot. If you touch a hair on him, I swear it. You wouldn't dare, Kendo. Now that I think about it, did you sell him the weapons he used to kill those kids? The man bellowed. Evelyn, terrified, gripped Kendo's jacket. Leo got up and took refuge behind John, his small body trembling. John, finally, spoke. His voice was barely a whisper that cut through the crowd, but in the tense silence, it resonated with a deadly authority. If you take one more step, the slaughter you saw on TV will seem like a bad joke, John said, his eyes cold as Arctic ice. It wasn't a threat, but a brutal reminder of his capability. The man with the rebar stumbled, not only from the fear of death, but from the inhuman coldness with which John had sentenced him. An older woman, off to the side, screamed, "Don't believe him. He's just one man, and we're sick of his lies. He brought evil here." The civilian mass compacted, advancing 2 steps, closing the circle. A young man tried to grab an abandoned toolbox, desperately looking for anything to use as a weapon. "What if we push him onto the tracks? We can't leave him here. He's a demon who brings bad luck," shouted another voice from the rear, filled with the cowardice that the safety of the crowd provides. The people hesitated again, looking at the dark abyss of the tracks, a horrible but tempting solution. The man with the metal rebar stopped dead in his tracks, the rust on the bar creaking under the pressure of his grip. John Wick noticed the change in the rebar man's gaze, the cowardly hesitation in those shouting from behind. That hesitation was his only, silent chance. Without losing a millisecond, John drew his MP5 from his chest. The metallic click of the assault rifle being brought into position was the first warning sound. Then, without aiming at anyone, but at the highest point of the concrete vault rising above their heads, he fired a controlled burst of 3 rounds. The blast was cataclysmic in the enclosed space. The echo reverberated through the tunnel with the force of a bomb, and debris of concrete and dust rained down on the crowd. It wasn't a shot to kill, but a demonstration of sonic and physical power. Several people dropped to the ground covering their heads, the sheer force of the sound shaking their bones. In that instant, the crowd remembered they were dealing with a man who could not only kill them, but would do so without blinking. In that moment of chilling terror, Leo, the little boy who had lost his mother, stepped out from behind John. He looked at the people, and then at Kendo. With all his might, the child screamed, but not with words, but with a sound of deep anguish. The sound was the pure desperation of an orphan who saw his last protector attacked by the only thing left, other humans. "He saved me. He can't be a murderer," Leo screamed, pointing at John. The child couldn't form complete sentences, but his desperate attempt to defend John was enough to break the spell of rage. The people backed away, struck by the innocence and terror in the child's voice. The people fell silent. The child behind John was defending him. The contrast was too sharp. The monster in armor was, to this child, a savior. Kendo seized the moment of confusion, his shotgun still raised. "Look at him. We just came from the surface. John saved us from a squad of mutated dogs. If you want to fight, we'll fight, but if I were you, I'd save that rage for when the train returns. We have real enemies outside this station." The crowd felt embarrassed and confused. The hatred began to dissolve, leaving only fear. The man with the metal rebar slowly lowered his arm, his eyes fixed on the concrete floor. The screaming women hugged their children, their sobs now silent and humiliated. The danger had dissipated, leaving a residue of guilt and fear in the air. But John Wick hadn't lowered his guard one bit. He knew the calm was temporary. The following 10 minutes stretched out in the station like a tense, silent eternity. The platform had become an emotional minefield. Kendo, exhausted by the adrenaline of the confrontation and the run, slowly put down his shotgun and sat on one of the old metal benches attached to the wall, pulling Evelyn and Leo with him. Evelyn huddled against her father, silently trembling. Leo, still clinging to Kendo's thigh, glanced at John, feeling safe but confused. John didn't move. He remained standing, in the exact spot where he had fired, his MP5 now held at chest height, the barrel slightly tilted toward the ground in a low alert position. He was a statue of concrete and Kevlar. His posture didn't invite conversation, approach, or forgiveness. He was on guard, waiting. The crowd regrouped, but this time, the movement was to distance themselves. They shuffled toward the other end of the platform, an awkward silence hanging over them. There were whispers, of course. Murmurs of scorn, resentment, and renewed fear. The killer, he's not human, an armed monster. But no one dared to look John in the eye for too long, much less approach him. The hole the bullets had left in the ceiling was a physical reminder of the controlled lethality John had exercised. The fear of the infected in the tunnel had mingled with the fear of this man. They were safe from him for now, but they knew they didn't have him on their side. John, ignoring the ostracism, kept his focus on the blind spots, the dark tracks, the mouth of the arrival tunnel, and the stairwell gap. 10 minutes. The emergency light kept flickering, marking time in irregular pulses. Suddenly, the silence was broken with immediate violence. There was no diesel engine, no horn blast, only a dry, dull impact, like a tactical boot hitting the first concrete step of the tunnel entrance. Immediately after, the brutal, mechanical, and coordinated sound of metal, the click of 7 rifle bolts being chambered in the darkness of the stairs. It was the sound of professionals with suppressors. John turned his head sharply, his eyes widening in a rare instant of brutal surprise. They had been flanked. Before the first military shadow materialized, John lunged toward the bench where Kendo and the children were. His movement was so fast and forceful that he nearly dragged Kendo to the tracks. Now, his voice was a guttural whisper, more a physical command than a verbal one. He pushed Leo and Evelyn toward the platform with one hand, while his other hand grabbed the back of Kendo's vest. Kendo, confused, barely had time to react. His mind processed that the threat wasn't the infected, but something worse. What? Now, move, Kendo. John's tone allowed no questions. It was the voice of a man who had seen death too many times and recognized its imminent arrival. Kendo reacted by instinct. He grabbed Evelyn and slid her into the dark, moldy gap leading to the tracks. Evelyn, down. Leo, follow us, fast. While Kendo helped Evelyn down into the void of the tracks, Leo lifted his head. His eyes, still swollen from recent crying, fixed on the first figure descending the stairs. The man entering the gloom wore dark, thick, unmarked tactical gear. What captivated Leo wasn't the rifle or the boots, but the full gas mask with red reflective lenses that concealed the soldier's face. The bright red in the darkness, the inhumanly heavy silhouette, the cold control emanating from the figure. A memory, a fragment of pain, settled in his small mind. Not a memory of fear, but of betrayal. The deafening sound of his mother screaming and then the silence. And the last figures he had seen, just before John dragged him out, had been dark silhouettes, with bright red eyes in the night. It was them, the ones who had shot. The ones who had killed his mother. The pain was a knife, and the boy was paralyzed for a second, the brutal truth of the military figures crashing down on him. Kendo pulled him hard, making him snap out of it. Leo, come on. Kendo, not understanding the cause of the child's paralysis, pushed him gently and slid after the children into the dark tunnel. The darkness of the tracks was a cold embrace. Kendo leaned against the damp wall, his shotgun raised. He and the children took refuge in the first maintenance recess of the tunnel, the blackness being their ally. John stayed behind. He pressed himself against a concrete support column, his body merged with the shadow. From his position, he had a clear view of the soldiers. The MP5 was in firing position, his index finger resting just beside the trigger, but his left hand had already drawn his suppressed pistol. He saw the crowd. Despite the initial click of the bolts, relief flooded the panic. The people, desperate for official salvation, ignored the implicit violence in the raised weapons. The first soldier who approached, the leader, John identified him by the fluidity of his movements, and the radio on his shoulder held a small, directional megaphone. He wore a gas mask identical to his men's, with the red reflectors hiding his eyes. Citizens of Raccoon City, calm, we have arrived. We are military aid from Umbrella. The leader's voice was a professional, reassuring echo that bounced off the concrete arches. Stay calm and cooperate. We will take you to a safe place. An evacuation point. The crowd began to move toward the voice. Thank God, shouted a man with a bag, with tears of desperation. I knew the government wouldn't abandon us, cheered a woman, crying with relief as she approached. Umbrella, we work for them, I knew they would come, exclaimed another, feeling a false sense of connection to the corporation. Tell them where the sick people are, we have to get out of here, urged an old woman, willing to cooperate with any authority. While the leader maintained the distraction, the other 6 soldiers moved with terrifying efficiency. They advanced in an open formation, not to defend, but to contain. They separated into pairs, moving silently between the columns and the crowd. John noticed the pattern. They were creating a deadly semicircle, securing every exit and cover point on the platform, from the entrance tunnel to the opposite edge. They were not establishing a perimeter of protection, they were establishing a crossfire field. The leader, perfectly positioned in the center front, became the focal point. His speech continued, full of false hopes. A man in the crowd, the one who had raised the metal rebar against John, saw his chance for revenge and approached the leader. "Soldier, thank you, but you have to stop that murderer." The man's voice was filled with resentment. "The one from the school massacre. He's here, among us, he threatened us and tried to kill. He doesn't deserve to be saved." Several voices joined the chorus of accusation. "Yes, the man in the black suit. Where is he? Stop him." The umbrella leader raised a hand, stopping the commotion with a calm gesture. John, watching from the column, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. The soldier spoke again, his voice low and serene. "Don't worry, citizens, that individual will be detained. And don't worry about his judgment anymore." The leader paused dramatically, looking at the crowd with his reflective eyes. "Because he will be sentenced to death, just like all of you." The calmness of the statement was worse than a scream. The crowd fell into complete silence, paralyzed by confusion and terror. A man tried to ask, stammering, What are you saying?" The leader didn't answer with words. He simply raised a gloved hand. It was a signal. Instantly, the remaining 6 soldiers, who had already positioned themselves perfectly at strategic points on the platform, raised their rifles. They were not aiming toward the tracks or the infected. They were aiming toward the defenseless crowd. They had created an extermination trap, ensuring that no one could escape the crossfire. John saw the monstrosity of the plan. If he tried to shoot the leader, the other 5 would slaughter the crowd. If he shot one soldier, the other 4 would take care of it. He couldn't shoot everyone without risking hitting a civilian, as the people were too tightly grouped. His position at the column gave him a clear view, but it was also a trap. His eyes fell on the soldier positioned on the far right, near the mouth of the arrival tunnel. That soldier was the most isolated of the 6, and his elimination was the only move that could break the formation. John raised the suppressed pistol that had been in his left hand. When the leader lowered his fist and the soldier on the right began to bring the barrel of his weapon toward the crowd, John fired first. The shot from the suppressed pistol was a loud, wet thud, a sound that was drowned out by the screams of terror. However, it was enough. John's bullet struck directly into the reflective glass of the soldier's left eye mask. The impact was dry and lethal. The soldier's figure slumped against the concrete without making a sound, the rifle falling with a dull thud, as the bullet perforated his brain. The silent death of the first soldier caused a momentary confusion. The leader, believing his man had initiated the fire, roared an unintelligible order. The remaining 4 soldiers, excluding the leader and the fallen, didn't hesitate. Following the leader's order and the fire initiation signal, they opened fire on the crowd. The metal screamed, bullets whistled, and the screams of the crowd drowned out the sound of the shots, as the massacre had begun. John felt a pang of cold rage. His shot had been perfect, surgical, designed to break the formation before the fire started. He had failed. The extermination had begun. The only effect of his action had been to turn the murder into chaos. He lunged out from the concrete column with terrifying speed. His MP5 hung from his shoulder, but the suppressed pistol in his left hand was now his only active weapon, as he needed his right hand to navigate the terror. The air was saturated with pure terror. The shots from the rifles, although suppressed, sounded like compressed thunder in the enclosed space. The smell of blood and gunpowder was already mixing with the stench of the subway's dampness. As John moved, the horror unfolded around him. He saw bodies fall like rag dolls. He saw the panic reflected in the eyes of a man who stumbled right in front of him, who died an instant later from a shot to the chest before he could get up. People weren't fleeing the soldiers, they were fleeing the fire, running in erratic, directionless patterns, directly across John's lines of sight. The massacre became a tactical obstacle. His target was the second soldier in the umbrella line, the one positioned directly across from him, with the rifle aimed toward the center of the platform. He covered the last few meters toward the soldier, his movement almost a fusion of agility and strength. At a distance of 2 meters, John used his right hand to forcefully shove a stumbling man who had obscured his target. The man tripped, falling onto another civilian, creating a quarter-second tactical window in the flow of refugees. In that small opening, John raised his suppressed pistol. Double tap. The first shot impacted the base of the soldier's neck. The second, barely a flash later, went to the back of his head. 2 dry bursts, phut-phut. The umbrella soldier, the second to fall, stood momentarily still, the rifle falling before him. His body slumped, without a single spasm, joining the chaos on the concrete. The leader, who was near the main entrance, had been monitoring the firing field. But seeing his second man fall, and then the dark figure that had emerged from the column, he understood. It wasn't a civilian mistake. It was John Wick. Forget the civilians. The leader's voice, amplified by the megaphone, cut through the gunfire with a sharp cry of rage and authority. Hammer is down. Lance is down. There's a ghost on the left, near Hammer's column. Secure the target. Civilian dispersal. Eliminate the subject. Instantly, the fire ceased. The three remaining soldiers, the leader and the two men on the left flank, stopped shooting at the crowd, and the barrels of their suppressed tactical rifles rotated with deadly synchronization toward John. The chaos stopped, replaced by a sudden, eerie silence, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the sobs of those hiding. The crowd, realizing the massacre had stopped, scrambled in terror toward the entrance tunnel, away from the man in the black suit and the three masked soldiers who now faced him. John stood amidst the blood-stained concrete, his MP5 in his right hand, his suppressed pistol in his left. Three opponents, a leader in the center and two well-positioned soldiers on the flanks. The umbrella leader stepped forward 2 paces, his red eyes piercing the darkness. He saw John's cold, calculated posture, the aura of lethal efficiency surrounding him. Umbrellas, Baba Yaga, death sentence for interference, the leader hissed. John didn't reply, he just executed a quick, almost invisible change in posture. His left foot moved slightly forward, his body weight shifted, and his MP5 came up. The first soldier on the right flank didn't wait. He raised his rifle to shoot. John was faster. He fired the MP5 in a controlled burst of 2 rounds, the first pair aimed at the head of the soldier on the right. The 9mm bullets impacted directly on the gas mask with a metallic sound. The soldier staggered. But before he could fall, John didn't wait for the result. The second pair of his MP5 burst was aimed at the soldier's knees, and as the figure fell, John threw his suppressed pistol with brutal precision. The weapon spun and struck the left flank soldier's shoulder, a strategic distraction that bought John half a second of movement. The left flank soldier moved to intercept, but John was already within range. He grabbed the soldier's wrist with his free right hand, twisting forcefully against the thumb. The soldier's tactical rifle dropped with a painful crunch of bone. John didn't let go of the hand, instead, he swung it, using the soldier's dislocated arm as a whip to strike the leader who had now recovered and was aiming. The dislocated arm struck the leader's masked face. The leader grunted, his shot deflecting and perforating the concrete ceiling. John finished the movement. With overwhelming force, he pulled the soldier's arm back, and with a single levering motion, broke his neck. The left flank soldier's body went rigid for a moment and then slumped lifelessly. Now only 2 remained, John and the leader. The leader, recovering from the blow to the head, aimed his rifle again. John gave him no time. The MP5 in John's hand roared, emptying the rest of its magazine into the leader's armored center mass. The leader felt the impact of the 9mm bullets on his vest's armor plate. They were powerful, but not penetrating. However, the force of the shots made him stagger backward. The leader fired blindly, missing John by a meter. John dropped the empty MP5. The sound of his hand moving to the back of his suit, where he kept his ballistic knife, echoed in the deadly silence. The battle, which had begun with a whisper, was going to end with knife in hand. The leader, seeing John unarmed and the glint of the knife, dropped his rifle. The leader knew that long-range combat was over and that John was a master of close combat. He drew his own tactical blade, a heavy combat knife, and charged at John. The clash was an impact of steel against bone. The leader attempted a horizontal thrust, a broad, powerful technique designed to cut and penetrate soft armor. John, using his waist, leaned under the blade with inhuman precision, allowing the leader's blade to pass harmlessly over his head. In the same movement, John pivoted and used his entire body weight to drive his elbow directly into the reflective glass of the leader's gas mask. The blow was devastating. The glass shattered with a wet crunch, and the leader stumbled back a step, groaning. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, but did not stop his rage. The shattered mask revealed the leader's eyes, filled with professional hatred and absolute coldness. His knife rose for a downward slash. John intercepted it with his forearm, cushioning the blow, feeling the edge of the blade superficially cut the Kevlar of his suit. It wasn't enough to stop him. John slid his hand over the leader's wrist and, with a simple levering pressure on the joint, made the leader drop his knife. The combat weapon fell to the bloody concrete. The leader, now defenseless, tried to lunge at John. He was a big man, laden with heavy gear. John didn't fight the force, he used the leader's momentum. As the leader leaned in, John grabbed him by the neck and waist, spinning his body and throwing him over his shoulder. The umbrella leader crashed onto the concrete with a force that shook the platform, the weight of his own armor punishing him. Before the leader could even gasp for breath, John was already on top of him. John plunged his ballistic knife in again and again, seeking the flexible seams of the armor, the soft points of the gear, the collarbone, the groin, and finally, the neck exposed by the impact. John's movements were clean, fast, devoid of emotion. Each thrust was the completion of a contract. After the sixth stab, the umbrella leader lay still, his exposed eyes staring at a place John knew too well, nothingness. John rose from the leader's remains. The silence was total, except for the dripping of water and the muffled weeping of the survivors who had crawled away from the scene of the massacre. 7 umbrella soldiers lay dead on the concrete. The tactical silence revealed the magnitude of the horror. John had not been able to prevent the carnage. The platform's concrete was a newly finished battlefield, a chaotic mix of fallen bodies, scattered belongings, and pools of dark blood. There were fragile corpses of elderly people who hadn't been fast enough to flee, young people who had died in their desperation, and, most starkly, the silent, inert bodies of several children who had been mercilessly gunned down in the first burst of fire. The air filled with new sounds, the anguish cries of those searching for loved ones, the agonizing groans of the wounded, and the orders of other survivors who, emerging from their paralysis, rushed to help. Kendo was the first to react. He crawled out of the track refuge, his shotgun falling to the ground. He shouted Evelyn's and Leo's names, and seeing they were safe, he launched into aid. Kendo was the only one with first aid training. His voice rose above the misery, directing the unharmed to make tourniquets with torn strips of clothing. He lifted the wounded, dragged them, ignoring the soldiers' blood. There was only room for the civilians' pain. John retreated to the base of the nearest column. He let the MP5 and the suppressed pistol drop at his feet, but instead of reloading, he sat heavily against the cold concrete. His shoulders slumped, the rage that had driven him dissipated, leaving an icy void. He checked his wounds with professional efficiency, a couple of superficial cuts from the leader's knife on his forearm and an expanding bruise on his elbow from the impact against the mast. As John regained his breath, he noticed the change in the gazes. The survivors who had watched him kill, the ones who moments earlier had shouted his name with resentment and fear, now paused. Their eyes no longer reflected hostility or thirst for revenge, but a silent, shocked gratitude. He had been a demon, yes, but he had just killed 5 worse demons. A middle-aged woman, with white hair and a dust-stained dress, slowly approached him. John saw she had been helping a wounded young man. "Sir," the woman said, her voice sweet despite being broken by horror. "Thank you, truly, thank you, you saved us all." John looked at her. His confusion was palpable, a small break in his emotional armor. 10 minutes ago, they wanted to lynch him. Now, she was thanking him. He only nodded, unable to form a reply. The woman saw the cut on his forearm. "Please, allow me to help you with that," she asked with an outstretched hand. John hesitated, but then nodded again. "Fine," was his only word. She knelt, with an astonishing calmness amidst the chaos. She tore a piece of fabric from her own dress, soaked it in one of the remaining water bottles, and cleaned the cut with almost maternal tenderness. "I'm a nurse, or I was," she murmured, as she wrapped the clean cloth and knotted it firmly, but without tightening, to prevent excessive bleeding. That was brilliant," the woman continued. "Very brave. No one else dared to stand up. We were blinded by hope." John only nodded again. "I had to stop them." His voice was hoarse. "My name is Emma," she said, sitting beside him for a moment. "John," he replied, laconic. They stayed in shared silence. John watched the pandemonium, the pain, the despair. He saw the tiny bodies of the children, people who had nothing to do with Umbrella or the Raccoon City hell, torn apart by a military order. He felt an indescribable weight. The world was hell, and no matter how much he killed, the fire kept burning. Shortly after, Emma got up, excusing herself. "I have to get back to help the boy. Take care, John." She left without waiting for a response. At that moment, he felt a movement. Evelyn and Leo had come out of the tunnel and, seeing that Kendo was busy lifting a heavy man, they approached John. They stopped beside him, the boy and the girl, silent and trembling. Leo broke the silence first, not with words, but with an act of pure childhood need. He quietly walked up and hugged John's side. His small face burrowed into the armored fabric of the suit. John noticed the trembling of his body and the silent tears falling onto his jacket. Evelyn, although older and more aware of John's imposing figure, couldn't help but follow suit. She approached John's other side, her small body sobbing. "I was so scared, Mr. Wick," Evelyn whispered, her voice muffled. "I was so scared something would happen to my dad. It's just, he's my father and my mother at the same time. I don't have anyone else." Hearing those words, John's heart, which had been frozen for years, felt a painful warmth contract. They were words he knew too well, the same feeling of loss and the same brutal dependence. With a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself in a long time, John placed a large, warm hand on Evelyn's back, gently squeezing it. He did the same with Leo, enveloping the boy in a gesture of comfort. He said nothing, but the contact was the only answer that mattered. After a minute, the crying subsided. John kept his hand on Evelyn's back until her tremors lessened. The scene was of a man who didn't know how to give comfort, but was trying. Finally, they pulled away. "We have to go," John said, his voice low. "Now." He turned toward the tracks, but before he could take 3 steps, a loud metallic rattling echoed from the tunnel. It wasn't the sound of the infected's shuffling steps, but the unmistakable and expected rumbling of a moving train. A wave of frantic relief swept through the survivors. Despair transformed into organized energy. Cries of pain turned into cries of urgency. The train is coming." The people, including the less severely wounded, moved with renewed strength. The unharmed began to carry the most severely wounded, dragging them and carrying them on their backs toward the edge of the platform. The chaos turned into a somber dance of cooperation. Those who had attacked each other moments before now worked together to drag the crippled bodies away from the recent massacre, toward the promise of escape. John watched calmly. He was a man of solitary action, but he respected the collective will to survive. He methodically reloaded his MP5, the stock pressed against his shoulder to ensure the magazine was seated. Then, he picked up the suppressed pistol he had thrown during the fight and holstered it. The train, a rusty, dirty utility vehicle from the Umbrella Corporation, ironically, the very symbol of their doom, screeched to a halt. Kendo was at the car door, his shirt already torn to make makeshift bandages. His hands were covered in blood, but his face reflected immense gratitude as he carried an elderly man. Kendo made sure Evelyn and Leo got onto the train and sat safely, away from the flow of the wounded. After about 10 minutes, the platform was almost empty of survivors. Only the silent bodies and the blood remained. Kendo approached the train door, looking at John, who still stood in the center of the stained platform, a dark, immovable anchor. Evelyn and Leo were right behind Kendo, their faces small and serious. "Mr. Wick," Kendo said, his voice low and loaded with emotion. "Get on. There's still room. Without you, we would have died in that shop, or worse, here." John slowly shook his head. "I can't go. I have some things to take care of." Kendo nodded. He understood that, for a man like John, some debts couldn't be paid by running away. "Take care, John." "Take care of him," John replied, his eyes fixed on Leo. Kendo nodded, then looked at Evelyn with a light tone, breaking the tension. "Hey, Evelyn, looks like you and Leo will get along fine on this trip." Evelyn, her cheeks flushed at the mention of Leo, looked away and only murmured a shy, "Yes, Dad." Kendo turned back to John. He slid the strap of his pump-action shotgun off his shoulder. "Take it," he said, offering him the weapon. "I have my daughter, my mission is over. You'll probably need it more." John accepted the gesture. The shotgun, heavy and familiar, felt good in his hands. Kendo handed him a box of ammunition shells. "Go," John said. Kendo got onto the train. Just before the conductor slammed the door shut, Kendo and the 2 children peered out. Evelyn and Leo, together, raised their hands and waved one last, silent goodbye. The train began to move, slow at first, then faster, swallowed by the dark tunnel. John was left alone. The emergency light continued to flicker over the inert bodies of the Umbrella soldiers. The pools of blood slowly coagulated on the concrete, the brutal evidence of the massacre. John was in a deafening silence, now more alone than ever. The train had taken with it the only reason he had hesitated on his path. He methodically chambered the new shotgun, the sound of the metal sliding a shell into the breech echoing in the void. Now, his mission was all that remained. He looked at the bloodstain of the umbrella leader. The only way to stop the fire was to find the arsonist. John looked up at the station ceiling. Umbrella was beneath the city. He needed a map, a route, an access point. He remembered Jill Valentine's words, mentioning that the police chief, Brian Irons, was probably more involved in Umbrella's secrets than he would admit. Before the infection, the police department (RPD) would have been a hive of police, an impossible target for him, with his face potentially in all databases. But now, the city was a wasteland. The RPD was likely in ruins, filled with desperate survivors or totally abandoned, the perfect place to look for clues about a possible service access to Umbrella's underground infrastructure. It was the only option that came to mind at the moment. John stood up. He slung the new shotgun over one shoulder and the MP5 over the other. He drew his suppressed pistol, holding it firmly as he headed toward the exit. It was then he saw the shadow cast by an imposing vehicle, abandoned by the Umbrella soldiers. It was a deep black armored Humvee, stained with dust and blood. John smiled, an almost imperceptible grimace. Well, at least I won't have to walk to the police station. Before getting in, he took out his satellite phone. The screen had a few cracks, scars from recent battles. He dialed Jill's number. No answer, just the dead tone. John sighed, still not answering. She probably lost it, he thought. Just as his hand rested on the armored door handle of the Humvee, he felt footsteps. The sound wasn't the slow shuffle of an infected or the heavy movement of a frightened human. It was a deliberate, light step, effortlessly approaching from the darkness. Almost instinctively, John crouched and raised his suppressed pistol toward the source of the sound, moving with the silent speed of a phantom. The intermittent flash of a revealing lamp illuminated a silhouette moving with a supernatural grace among the shadows. It was none other than Ada Wong. Despite the chaos, she remained impeccable. She wore a cocktail dress, an incongruous vision of high society amidst the destruction. Over it, she had a trench coat of an intense scarlet color that covered her like a shield. Her high-heeled boots, despite being completely impractical for the situation, seemed to be no impediment, and she moved with effortless fluidity. Unlike the rest of the survivors, her black hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, not a single strand out of place. Ada slowly approached John, raising her open hands in a sign of surrender, her face playful. "Is someone not answering the legendary John Wick's calls?" she said, her tone playful and full of brazen confidence. John, without lowering the pistol, narrowed his eyes. His voice was a growl. "Who are you?" Ada lowered her hands, crossing them over her chest with exasperating calmness, ignoring the barrel of the gun pointed at her face. Her eyes met John's, a mix of cunning and ancient knowledge. "I come on behalf of the Continental and everything you know," she replied calmly. "The High Table wants to help you annihilate Umbrella." Chapter 28, The Threat. September 28, Raccoon City, 7:35 p.m. John Wick's suppressed pistol remained steady, pointed directly at the center of the woman's chest. The gunpowder haze and the stench of death mixed with the expensive perfume emanating from the stranger. She held his gaze, a slight, challenging smile playing at the corners of her mouth, her scarlet trench coat a beacon of audacity against the gray cement of the station. "The High Table wants to help," John repeated, his voice a low, dangerous growl, laced with sarcasm. He lowered the pistol tip by only an inch, not out of trust, but to better see her expression. "And what made them think I'd want their help? I thought the Casablanca incident made my status regarding their rules clear." The woman laughed softly, a melodic sound utterly out of place in the subway station full of corpses. She took another step toward John, closing the safe distance, forcing him to slightly raise his chin. "Come on, John. No need to bring up your forced vacation," she said, her voice an intimate whisper that contrasted with the danger. Her almond-shaped eyes settled on John with an intensity designed to disarm. "Don't you think it's impolite to point a gun at a lady who is only trying to be helpful?" John was unmoved, his face a granite mask. He had seen too many tactical tricks in the field for beauty and calculated vulnerability to have any effect. "If you stand in front of the barrel, you are not a lady. You are a target." "Who are you?" John asked, keeping his tone unwavering. She sighed with a faint irritation, her hand moving to brush back a strand of black hair that wasn't out of place. "I am the key to your elevator, John. My name is Ada." She straightened, the seduction giving way to seriousness. "You see, John, Umbrella is a problem for everyone, even for those above you and me. This infection, or virus, whatever they call it, is what we call a market disruption. It doesn't respect the rules, it doesn't accept gold, and most importantly, it threatens anonymity. She paused, allowing the concept to sink in. When the world goes insane, our havens stop being safe. Raccoon City is a containment failure so monumental that if it isn't stopped here, the high table, the Continental, and the entire infrastructure that supports our way of life, will collapse. The Walking Dead don't accept our rules of no business on Continental grounds. John lowered the weapon, but only to maintain control over the situation, not out of respect. Ada had articulated the only point that mattered. The table never acted out of morality, but out of survival of the system. And what do you have to do with all of this, Ada? John asked, using her name grudgingly. I am their contact. I am the key, she said, her tone becoming professional and cold. Not only will I tell you how to get into the Umbrella underground base, but I am here to retrieve an object of interest that is inside. An object the table does not want to fall into the wrong hands, not even Umbrella's. An object, or your ticket out, John countered. The high table cares about stability. I care about power, Ada whispered, a fleeting glimmer in her eyes. She gestured toward the imposing Humvee. Now, Hunter, we have a trip to the RPD police station. You need access, and Chief Brian Irons is a known Umbrella asset. If there's a service entrance to their hive beneath the city, he knows it. You need his knowledge, and I need you to take me there. John looked at the Humvee, then at the woman in the cocktail dress and scarlet trench coat. Distrust was a primary instinct, but on this chessboard where the pieces were monsters and the only exit was a hell, an ally, however suspicious, was a necessary risk. Get in, John ordered. He walked to the driver's door of the Humvee, without looking back, knowing she would follow. Ada smiled. The grapnel gun that had been concealed beneath her trench coat went back into place. The plan was in motion. A pleasure doing business, John Wick, she said, before getting into the passenger seat of the armored vehicle. A few minutes ago, Ada Wong was on the verge of exasperation, a state she rarely allowed herself. Raccoon City was a labyrinth of chaos, ash, and death, but the worst part was its inefficiency. She had been in the city for 2 days. The chaos had made locating a man who was supposedly in plain sight a logistical nightmare. She moved across the rooftops near the city center, the cocktail dress and scarlet trench coat a ridiculous contrast to the surroundings. She sighed. Too much money was at stake to fail. Her most secondary objective was the G-Virus, the crown jewel that her mysterious informant and ally, Albert Wesker, had tasked her with retrieving from the depths of Umbrella. Wesker had offered a paltry $4 million for the sample. But then there was the high table. They, terrified that the Raccoon City outbreak would destroy their global anonymity, wanted her to focus on the T-Virus, the main outbreak, and, conveniently, on neutralizing the Baba Yaga. The table had doubled Wesker's offer, offering $10 million for the T-Virus sample, in addition to the $20 million bounty on John Wick's head. Her plan was elegant and simple. She would use John Wick, the man capable of decimating an army would handle the dirty work, the ones who would block the entrance to her objective. She would convince him of a temporary truce, using the excuse of the high table's collaboration, so that he would lead her directly to her target. Once John had paved the way, she would liquidate him, collecting the bounty. $30 million for a single day's work, plus the G-Virus for Wesker. The risk was high, but the reward was worth it. She was about to give up and try to access the police station on her own, when a heavy, persistent noise broke the moan of the distorted sirens, a heavy diesel engine. From her position on the ledge, Ada saw a black armored Humvee H1 speed past on a side street, ignoring the debris. Her mind immediately went to work. Umbrella agents usually didn't drive such a discreetly armored Humvee, and the vehicle seemed to be moving with a fierce purpose. It's probably Umbrella's, Ada thought. Perhaps they are heading toward a fight with John Wick, or to his extraction point. Besides, if John Wick isn't there, I have nothing to lose. The possibility was too sweet to ignore. If the fight had already happened, maybe she would find the Humvee next to John's body, weakened or dead, which would turn the $20 million into a simple pickup. Ada didn't waste a second. She pulled out her grapnel gun and fired the anchor at the building across the street. She launched into an agile and silent dash across the rooftops, following the vehicle's trail. The trail led her directly to the subway station. Ada approached cautiously and saw a group of Umbrella elite soldiers, the Hunter team, if her knowledge of the table was correct, stealthily enter, armed to the teeth. She hid and waited, hearing a series of muffled shots in a subsequent silence. An eternal minute passed. When the heavy metal door opened, it wasn't the soldiers who came out. It was a man in a completely black tailor-made suit, with traces of blood and gunpowder, but alert to the environment. John Wick. Ada felt a pang of frustration. She would have preferred to find a dead John Wick. It would be the easiest way to earn $34 million, the $20 million for him plus the $14 million she expected to get for the viruses. But at least if she had found John, who was standing, it meant he had killed an elite Umbrella team just to get to the surface. The collaboration option would have to do, for now. She would have the Baba Yaga do the heavy lifting. All she had to do was sell him the lie of the truce and the system stability. The plan was underway. Ada stepped out of the shadows. The game had begun. Returning to the present, she slid into the passenger seat of the armored Humvee with excessive grace for the occasion. Her scarlet trench coat, vibrant in the city's sinister twilight, settled. The process of buckling the seatbelt was slow, a purely performative act seeking John's gaze. Her presence was a magnetic field of expensive perfume and calculated danger that, for the first time in days, didn't smell of gunpowder or death. The Humvee, with John at the wheel, roared, crashed in burning cars, staggering infected, and survivors running in panic filled the streets. John kept his gaze fixed on the armored windshield, his movements on the wheel precise to dodge obstacles and avoid unnecessary contact. The buildings passed like fleeting visions of an urban nightmare, looted grocery stores, apartments with broken windows, and the thick smoke rising from the financial district. Ada broke the tense silence. "It's a very practical car," Ada commented, her voice low and silky. "Although I suppose your taste is usually something more classic. A Chevrolet Malibu, but with good armor, of course. Something classy so as not to offend the Continental doorman." John moved the wheel to crush an overturned police car. The scrap metal crunched under the wheels. Utility trumps aesthetics. Besides, John didn't look at her, the Malibu wouldn't survive being run over. A tiny smile, an almost imperceptible movement, curved Ada's lips. It was the closest thing to laughter she allowed. Wow, sarcasm, an unexpected weapon. I like it. Suddenly, she changed the subject, pointing to a collapsed cinema marquee. "Did you see the billboard? They were going to premiere a romantic comedy. I wonder if the ending would have been happier than ours." "Probably more predictable," John replied, dodging a zombie that lunged toward the cabin. "And I doubt the movie needs as many replacement fuses as this car." "And what was the plot about, Ada?" "The hero marries the woman who has been lying to him since the introduction." Ada took a moment to respond, savoring John's subtle jab. "Something like that. But, getting back to business," her tone became philosophical, as if they were in a seminar and not aboard a war vehicle. "John, even you must admit there's something fascinating about all this. So much anarchy. The world of rules and gold coins is dying. It's exciting, don't you think? What new order will emerge? This is the biggest power restructuring we will see in our lives." John tightened his grip on the wheel. "Order. Chaos is just a preamble to the new hierarchy. Order doesn't die, Ada, only those who dictate the rules change. And there is always someone waiting to collect the bill. Those seeking the new order are the ones who caused this disaster, or the ones who will profit from it." He paused, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "And I am not interested in either of those categories." Ada nodded, her face becoming serious as she acknowledged the truth in John's words. "That's the executioner's perspective, John. I have the engineer's perspective. If civilization collapses, there are no markets for my services. Think about the consequences. Who will accept a coin if the dead devour their children?" The conversation took another abrupt turn. Ada leaned in a little, studying him. "And how the hell do you maintain that suit? It's ridiculous. You've been through a slaughterhouse and that fabric still looks professional. A Continental tailor on call, perhaps." The question, though frivolous, was an attempt to penetrate his armor. John let out a heavy sigh, which might have been exasperation. "It's a secret. It's just a suit. It's easier to maintain than it looks, unlike driving while answering an oral exam on philosophy, women's fashion, and zombie geopolitics." The reply earned him a genuine smile, a fleeting flash of amusement in Ada's eyes. "You're teasing me," she whispered, entertained. "I like that. Most men would start screaming or asking for my phone number. Tell me, John, when was the last time you were with someone?" John ignored the question, his eyes fixed on the road. I won't give you the satisfaction of talking about my personal life while dodging corpses. What about you? Why did it take you 2 days to locate me if the high table is so interested in me? Were the heels a delaying factor? Ah, the key question, Ada smiled, regaining her composure. Well, let's just say tracking you down in the middle of the apocalypse is complex. Satellites don't distinguish well between John Wick and a zombie with very good taste, and I had to fly from Paris to an abandoned airport. And my boots are surprisingly comfortable. But, John, the high table sent me to cooperate, an impromptu team. The high table hates chaos, and I love money. We are the perfect team. The table only offers a market price for things, John retorted. And usually, I'm the item on the price list. What guarantee do I have that my price won't change once you get your object? My guarantee, Ada said with a coldness that momentarily froze the flirtation, is that I need you alive to get into the umbrella hive. You are my key. Besides, she added, returning to her light tone, I am the letter of credit that allows you to keep buying your time. For once, you are the strategic asset. John nodded once, without taking his eyes off the road. The RPD was in sight. They were getting close, a few more blocks and they would arrive. In that very instant, less than 100 meters from the imposing structure of the police station, the satellite phone John kept in the cup holder, a rugged, encrypted model, began to vibrate with furious intensity. It flashed with an unregistered number. John, who didn't usually take calls from unknown numbers, grabbed it anyway, sensing that the fury of the vibration was a prelude to something worse. Well, it looks like fate has called you, Ada joked with a playful smile, without taking her eyes off the street. It must be important if the great John Wick deigns to talk to anonymous people. Either it's a bill collector, or your dog is calling you. John ignored her, his face granite. He lifted the phone and brought it to his ear, without stopping driving. Wick, he said, his voice low and unadorned. On the other side, a woman's voice broke through, rough with fear and adrenaline. Jill Valentine. John, it's Jill. There's a monster, it's coming for you. Its target is Jill. John began, trying to get his mind to process the warning. Just as he was about to speak again, he felt the world fall apart. An inhuman, violent crash erased the sound of the phone. In the next instant, gravity inverted and his body became dead weight inside the vehicle. The call cut off with a squawk of static. The blow didn't come from the front, nor from the side. It came with apocalyptic power from the rear, an impact so brutal and centered that the Forden vehicle was lifted into the air as if it were made of paper. John's speed, combined with the force of the impact, turned the Humvee into an uncontrolled projectile. John felt the world slow down. The sound of screaming tires and twisting metal became a dull hum. It was the sound of time stopping in the middle of chaos. The air rushed from his lungs in a forced exhale as the seatbelt held him tightly, but the impact shoved him toward the steering wheel. The pressure made him gasp, and he felt a sharp pain in his rib cage, a reminder that, even in an armored vehicle, inertia was invincible. He saw Ada's expression in the passenger seat, a moment of total surprise and then, almost immediately, the cold acceptance of a professional death risk. There were no screams, only a terrible stillness. Ada instinctively brought a hand toward the belt of her trench coat, looking for a handhold or, perhaps, the grip of one of her hidden weapons. The armored windshield became a web of radial cracks, and fine dust from the road and the shattered interior began to float in the air like dark frost. The smell of hot fuel and burning rubber flooded the cabin, mixing with Ada's sweet, anachronistic perfume. The Humvee flipped onto its side, raising a dense cloud of dust and sparks as it dragged metal across the asphalt. The world became a succession of blurred images, gray asphalt, red twilight sky, and then more asphalt. Each rotation was a new blow, a new deformation of the metal reminding them they were in a spinning death trap. For a fraction of a second, as the vehicle spun out of control, John was able to glimpse the thing that had hit them. It was an immense silhouette, almost twice the size of a normal man, clad in a heavy black leather coat that concealed its deformed proportions. It moved with a brutal unnaturalness. It didn't run, but advanced with an relentless march that made the ground vibrate. Its head was hidden by what appeared to be a containment mask or a rudimentary bag, but John didn't need to see the face to understand that he was looking at an elite executioner. The most alarming thing was not its size, but the machinery that accompanied it. In its hand, or rather, coupled to its arm instead of a hand, it carried a monstrous rocket launcher. It wasn't held, it was integrated. The trail of fresh smoke confirmed the ignition. It was the ultimate expression of directed annihilation, an industrial assassin, a biological aberration designed solely for the hunt. It was the embodiment of Umbrella's industrial death, a Punisher designed for annihilation. The vehicle slammed down, hitting the roof before rolling onto one side and sliding with a prolonged screech that John felt directly in his bones. The Humvee finally stopped on its side, the driver's door now facing upward, toward a smoke-covered sky. The interior became a centrifuge of debris, glass fragments, loose equipment, and the weapons that had been thrown from their mounts. The world didn't go black for John. Instead, it lit up in a million points of paralyzing pain. The impact had broken several bones, he could feel the bruised flesh beneath the ballistic suit, the deep, throbbing pain with every shallow breath. His head pulsed with a migraine that promised fracture. John tried to move, but the seatbelt and the unnatural position of the vehicle held him captive. He was injured, battered, and trapped, but awake. His vision was a battlefield of flashing lights, but he focused through the pain. Next to him, Ada Wong had not been so lucky. Her body, less accustomed to that kind of vehicular punishment, hung limply from the seatbelt. Her head rested against the shattered side window, her neat ponytail undone and black strands covering one side of her face. There was no movement, no sound, only the faint breathing that rose and fell in her chest. She was unconscious. The danger didn't stop at the executioner. A more acrid, chemical smell began to flood the cabin, a distinct odor from the rubber. John focused his gaze on the engine, now inverted and wrinkled. A column of black, greasy smoke rose from the shattered hood, and a few orange flames licked the sheet metal. The Humvee, his mobile fortress, was rapidly turning into an oven. Chapter 29, Nemesis. September 28, 8:15 p.m. The Humvee was silent, a silence more terrifying than any roar. John focused through the haze of pain. The vehicle had landed on its side, the driver's door now the floor, and John was hanging from the seatbelt in an unnatural position. The impact had left him with a deep ache, a stinging friction that was hell with every shallow breath he tried to take. His armored suit hadn't prevented his body from becoming a map of bruises and forced bones. Next to him, Ada Wong was dead weight. Her body hung limply, the scarlet trench coat stained and torn. She was unconscious, a luxury John could not afford. The immediate danger wasn't the attacker, but the most basic law of survival. A pungent, chemical smell began to flood the cabin, distinct from the burnt rubber. John focused his gaze on what was once the hood, now inverted and wrinkled against the asphalt. A column of black, greasy smoke rose from the shattered hood, and a few orange flames licked the sheet metal. The Humvee, his mobile fortress, was rapidly turning into an oven. The heat began to radiate from the metal, transforming the cabin into a suffocating, toxic air trap. Death by asphyxiation or ignition was a timer that ran much faster than the Punisher's arrival. The pain screamed at him to stop, to give up, but John didn't deal with pain, he simply used it as fuel. The sense of urgency rekindled his most primal instinct. The first goal was liberation. With a stifled groan, he lifted his trembling hand toward the seatbelt buckle. His fingers, usually steady, slipped on the sweaty, hot metal. His body tensed, and John felt waves of agony run through his rib cage. Failure. Retry. The process is survival. The command was not an emotion, but a protocol. John gathered all the residual strength in his bruised left arm and pressed the release button with the base of his palm. Click. The buckle yielded. John's body fell from the vertical to the horizontal position against the driver's door. The impact of his own fall made him gasp, the hot air scorching his lungs. He was half buried under debris, broken radio equipment, empty shell casings, and several boxes of ammunition that had come loose. His left leg was trapped under the control panel, immobilized. The heat was suffocating, the air thin. Shit, he muttered, the word barely a whisper that admitted his state. He needed to free Ada. He had to get her out. As John struggled with his leg, the dry, heavy sound of the Punisher became audible from outside. There was no rush in its steps, just the terrible confidence of a hunter who knows his prey is bloody and trapped. John managed to turn his head to look through the cracked windshield. He saw a massive silhouette, blocking the faint twilight. The creature was not in a hurry. The Humvee was already doing the work for it, cooking its occupants. John ignored the sound of footsteps. Time was now his most pressing enemy. With his right hand, he blindly searched beneath the lining of his suit and found what he was looking for: his combat knife, an elegant fixed-blade instrument. It was his most reliable tool. He crawled, using his elbows to gain inches as the metal creaked and the heat rose. Smoke was already stinging his eyes, blurring his vision. He saw Ada, hanging inert, and the sight of her helplessness provoked an icy determination in John's heart. It wasn't anger, but the absolute functional necessity to preserve the asset, the only key that connected him to Umbrella. He couldn't afford to let her die. His mind worked at lightning speed. If she dies, he is alone with no information to go against Umbrella. But the motivation wasn't purely transactional. In the brief, tense interaction they had shared, Ada had proven to be, despite her flirtatiousness and secret agenda, an equal. She had handled pressure and threats with a wit and precision that John deeply respected. It had forged a grim, fleeting comradeship between two elite assassins. He braced himself against the passenger seat and raised the knife with a forced movement. The belt was made of extremely tough ballistic nylon webbing. John inserted the tip of the blade beneath the strap, right where it joined the clasp. He made a first cut, but the blade slipped from the tension. John's blood, mixed with sweat, made the handle slippery, but his grip tightened. Concentration. He had to cut without stabbing her and without missing. KSHHHH. The first section of the strap yielded with a snap. John repeated the movement on the second section, forcing the blade until his arm muscles trembled from the effort. The pain in his ribs intensified into agony. KSHHHH. The belt snapped completely. Ada's body slumped heavily against the side door, now the floor, right next to John, slightly shifting the metal and causing a fine shower of shrapnel to fall upon them. He gasped for air from the effort, and the pain returned, a tidal wave. In that instant, the Punisher stopped right next to the vehicle. John could feel the massive shadow covering the cabin. He heard a guttural sound, a kind of wet, rasping breathing, amplified by the proximity. The creature was assessing the vehicle, planning the final blow. The metallic click of the rocket launcher readjusting pierced the dull hell of the cabin. It wasn't just the sound of a weapon loading, it was the cold, mechanical confirmation that the Punisher didn't consider its job done. It was going to finish off the vehicle and its occupants. The priority had shifted. Weapon. The creature was too close for escape. He searched blindly beneath the shattered dashboard. The Colt Commando, his assault rifle, was out of reach, trapped under the passenger seat. But his MP5 was in its sling, fallen upside down across his waist. With an effort that cost him a muffled cry, John twisted, ignoring the tearing in his side, and unhooked the submachine gun from his body. He barely had the weapon in his hands when a horrible sound of stretching and tearing metal confirmed that the Punisher had arrived and was ripping off the Humvee's rear door. John could hear the creature's thick, guttural breathing. The top of the rear door peeled open with a metallic wrench. A massive arm, encased in black leather and ending in an industrial gauntlet, thrust through the opening. The arm went straight for the center of the vehicle, aiming for total destruction. John reacted out of pure instinct, his mind in autopilot mode. He raised the MP5 and, without precise aim, emptied half a magazine into the armored arm, forcing its way in. Bam 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 bam. The 9mm rounds, designed to neutralize humans, ricocheted off the thick leather and armor with surprising force, sending sparks and a horrible metallic sound, as if hitting reinforced concrete. The shock wasn't the noise, but the absolute lack of effect. It was like shooting at a block of steel. The arm momentarily withdrew, not from pain, but from the surprise and the sudden violence of the cabin. There was life. There was resistance. John felt a burst of pure adrenaline that temporarily drowned the pain of his broken ribs. The plan was simple, brutal, and immediate: get them out through the windshield. The windshield was already cracked from the impact. John raised the MP5, not as a firearm, but as an improvised battering ram. With an inarticulate cry of effort, he turned the weapon sideways and slammed the buttstock against the glass, widening the opening. The windshield buckled outward, leaving a ragged opening. Now or never. Ignoring the scrape of the metal against his suit, John slid under Ada's inert body. He grabbed the spy firmly by the torso with both arms. He lifted her with surprising strength, considering his state, and pushed her through the hole in the windshield with a calculated tilt. With Ada out, John used his knees against the seat and the pane as leverage. With tremendous effort, he propelled himself forward and up, sliding through the newly created hole. The sharp metal tore a layer of his suit, but his body passed through. He barely fell onto the dirty asphalt when the fresh air filled his lungs. He didn't stop. John braced himself on one knee, grabbed Ada by the collar of her trench coat, and began to drag her away from the smoking vehicle with frantic urgency. As John moved away, the impatient Punisher returned to the charge. The monster didn't bother to search through the ripped opening, it simply leapt onto the overturned Humvee, tearing its way through the trunk door with a deafening roar. Its goal was to shatter the cabin to finish its elimination mission. John reached the 20-meter mark. His body screamed for rest, but his brain was counting the time until ignition. It was right then, with the Punisher half inside the cabin and its hand blindly searching the metallic hell, that the engine fire reached the vehicle's most volatile cargo. The Umbrella soldiers had stored several high-explosive fragmentation grenade packages for an emergency. They were the powder that ignited the inferno. WHOOOMPH. The Humvee's explosion was cataclysmic. It wasn't a muffled gasoline blast, but a concentrated fury of metal, fire, and shockwaves. The vehicle became an iron supernova. The blast wave hit John with the force of a truck. John and Ada, dead weight in his arms, were thrown through the air. The impact caused John to lose consciousness for an instant, the world becoming a deafening cacophony of white pain. The Punisher, caught inside the Humvee as it tore through the seats and dashboard, took the full brunt of the explosive wave and the grenade fragmentation. The air filled with the sound of tearing metal, scorched flesh, and a gut-wrenching, unnatural howl that echoed through the streets of Raccoon City. John landed heavily against a brick wall about 4 meters away, with Ada still partially cushioned by his own body and suit. His vision recovered enough to see what was left of the Humvee, a burning, twisted mass, spitting molten metal debris and strangely colored flames. The Punisher was no longer in the cabin. It had been ejected by the force of the explosion. The creature slowly rose from the rubble about 10 meters away, its figure covered in oil and chunks of Humvee. The rocket launcher was gone. Its armored skin was severely damaged, cracked, with areas glowing with a feverish red from burns. Its right arm hung at an unnatural angle, and it staggered as it tried to regain its balance. It was hurt. John had bought time and secured the tactical advantage he needed. But John, bruised, bloody, and his ears still ringing, looked at Ada. She was still motionless. The advantage wouldn't last if he didn't move. John lifted his head, seeking the massive figure of the Punisher. The creature, now a smoking silhouette amidst the burning wreckage, was not moving toward them. It had slumped onto one knee, the other leg extended, its mutilated right arm dangling. Its head was tilted, as if processing a fatal error. The Punisher had entered a forced recovery mode, a brief pause to stabilize its severely damaged combat systems. This was not a truce, it was an opportunity. The surge of adrenaline that had allowed John to move and breathe during the explosion was at its peak. He had to use that hormonal spike. With a forced grunt, John pushed himself to his feet, every movement an act of pure will. He bent over Ada, lifted her in an improvised fireman's carry. She was a dead weight of bruised flesh and trench coat, but he held her firmly. Running was a generous term for what he did. It was a slow, laborious pace, a kind of limping trot that kept him in constant motion as he moved away from the hot zone. John forced himself to ignore the blurred vision and the stabbing pain in his ribs, glancing sideways as the Punisher's large hand weakly twitched, as if still trying to reach him. About 20 meters away, he spotted what looked like an old bookstore or post office. It was a brick building with a heavy wooden door. With Ada still loaded, John lunged toward the entrance. Upon reaching it, he stopped only long enough to gauge the target. He raised his good leg and slammed it with all his remaining force against the lock. Kaboom! The door didn't open gently, the frame yielded and the wood groaned in protest, giving them access. John entered, immediately turning and releasing the door to slam shut with a dull thud. He briefly glanced through the dusty window. The Punisher was still kneeling, immobile. They were inside. John slid toward the nearest wall, away from the light. With extreme care, he lowered Ada, letting her rest against the cold surface. She was breathing, but her face was pale and covered in soot. Once she was safe, John slumped down next to her. The silence of the abandoned building was a brutal contrast to the chaos outside. The roar of adrenaline faded, and in its place, the unbearable pain returned, this time unfiltered. John gritted his teeth, his body shaking. He let out a harsh, low growl, and his face contorted in an agonizing grimace as he leaned his head against the cold brick. They were alive, but now they had to deal with the consequences. John forced his mind into tactical inventory mode. The pain was nothing more than body telemetry data. With slow, precise movements, he slid his hands beneath his own armored suit. Shrapnel and twisted metal from the explosion had opened several deep, bloody cuts on his forearms and a particularly annoying one on his right thigh. Internal bruising was inevitable. Against those, he could do nothing but endure. He needed to stop the bleeding. His eyes fell on Ada's inert figure. He tore a section of the cleanest, toughest fabric from her scarlet trench coat. With trembling but firm hands, he used the cut fabric to tightly tie the most bleeding wounds on his limbs. The flow stopped. He turned his attention to Ada. With a delicacy that belied the pain he was feeling, he removed her damaged trench coat. As he did so, Ada's body was revealed. Underneath she wore a silk, red, off-the-shoulder evening dress, a choice so absurdly impractical that John couldn't help but let out a dry, raspy laugh, which instantly turned into a grimace of rib pain. A dress like that in this situation, he muttered, shaking his head. He examined the spy, multiple bruises and superficial cuts, but nothing serious. He bandaged her shoulders and knees with more pieces of the trench coat. As he did so, he noted her physique, a perfect balance between aesthetics and efficiency, a discipline that confirmed her professionalism. With Ada stable, John leaned back, forcing himself to calm his breathing. He reviewed the attack, the speed, the strength, the indifference to bullets, and the fact that the explosion had only forced the creature to its knees. In the middle of his thoughts, he remembered. Jill. He pulled out his phone. The screen was fragmented, but incredibly, it was still on. It took him several minutes to force his vision through the smudges and decipher the number of the last incoming call. He pressed to return it. He didn't have to wait long. John, for God's sake, it's me, Jill. I haven't been able to contact you. I lost my phone fleeing from hell. Where are you? The voice burst through, ragged with static and fear, but unmistakable. I'm okay. Found a pit stop. And you? His voice was a low growl, forced into calm. There was a brief silence. Jill had caught the involuntary hiss of pain John let out between words. Don't lie to me, she said. I can hear you. You're badly hurt. When I called you earlier. I'm sorry, I should have told you. Told me what? The monster. The one who was chasing me, Jill revealed urgently. I remember that before I lost sight of it, besides growling, stars, it was also saying your name. John, I knew it was coming for you after me. I found a broken phone in a store and dialed as fast as I could. Did you find it? The information hit John with the coldness of steel. He wasn't an incidental target. He was a primary target. Yes, well, it found me. It's resilient. Resilient, how bad is it? A bit out of commission momentarily, John admitted. It was sudden with its attack, it caught me off guard. It's tougher than anything I've ever known, Jill. But I can still fight. I just need half an hour. You don't have half an hour. I need to come get you now. You have to get out of there before that thing restarts. Where exactly are you? John forced his mind to orient itself through the stabbing pain. It's an old brick bookstore, near an intersection with a broken clock tower. I'm about 20 blocks from the RPD, I think. Jill let out a sound of recognition. I got it, I know that place. It's the old library on Main Street, right next to the river. It's a good spot, the door is solid. It was. Jill's voice tensed, but she sounded determined. Hold tight, John, I have a relatively clear path. I'll be there in 20 minutes, don't move. Understood, John said, his breath catching. John could only nod in the silence of the line, the final word barely audible. He hung up the phone. The contact with Jill had drained his last energy reserves. The pain returned, a furious roar that surpassed the ringing in his ears. His eyelids felt terribly heavy, and the image of Ada resting beside him faded into a welcoming blackness. John didn't fight the exhaustion. He simply let the darkness claim him, falling into an unconsciousness induced by exhaustion and injury, his body finally forcing him to a stop. About 5 minutes later, the world returned to Ada Wong not as a big bang, but as a dull throb behind her eyes, a searing pain that announced the forced return to consciousness. She opened her eyes. For a confused moment, she only saw the dusty ceiling of an unknown structure. What had happened? She forced herself to concentrate. The sensation of being shaken, the screech of metal, a devastating blow, the Humvee. She remembered the brutality with which the creature had impacted them. She tried to move her head, and a shiver ran down her neck. Her scarlet trench coat was gone. She was wearing her red evening dress, but several sections of fabric, roughly torn, were tied tightly around her shoulders and thigh. They were makeshift bandages. Her eyes immediately went to the man beside her. John Wick. He was leaning against the brick wall, his ballistic vest torn in several places, revealing dark cuts and horrible bruises. His breathing was shallow and labored, an irregular rhythm that indicated considerable internal damage. He was deeply unconscious. Ada felt the instinctive impulse of every agent, weapon inventory. She slid her hand beneath her thigh, under the soft silk fabric of the dress, to the hidden holster. Her trusty P9 pistol was in place. The cold metal was a familiar comfort. As her mind cleared, a single figure filled the void left by the concussion: $20 million. The high table had made the price clear: John Wick dead to demonstrate their capacity for control. If she could deliver the head of the Baba Yaga, even if she didn't have the virus the table had tasked her with, she could escape this city nightmare, leave Wesker and the chaos behind, and live the life much more luxurious than before. It was the opportunity, the only window of vulnerability. The most dangerous man in the world was unarmed, injured, and in a forced, deep sleep. The barrel of her pistol slowly and silently rose. The weight of the weapon in her hand was the weight of 20 million. Her eyes, now cold and determined, fixed on John's left temple. A single shot, quick, clean. Ada held her aim, her finger approaching the trigger, the awareness that she had just been saved by this man drilling into her head, a distant annoyance before the magnitude of the prize. Chapter 30. The Plan. September 28, Raccoon City. 8:30 p.m. The old bookstore was a temporary, silent sanctuary. John Wick lay on the cement floor, unconscious, his ballistic suit torn in several places, a map of dark contusions across his skin. Ada Wong knelt beside him, her P9 pistol drawn. The barrel of her weapon rose slowly and silently. The weight of the gun in her hand was the weight of $20 million. Her eyes, now cold and determined, fixed on John's left temple. A single shot, fast, clean. Ada held the aim, her finger inching toward the trigger, the awareness that she had just been saved by this man drilling into her head, a distant annoyance against the magnitude of the prize. Her finger trembled slightly as it made contact with the trigger guard. Her eyes, fixed on the assassin's bruised face, flickered between calculated fury and cold resolution. He had saved her life, it meant nothing. In her line of work, gratitude was a vulnerability. She squeezed. The click of the firing pin hitting the empty chamber echoed in the small space with a deafening clarity. There was no explosion, no light, just a dry, definitive sound of failure. Ada's body tensed in an immediate reaction of professional horror. Safety. She racked the slide back with feverish speed. The slide glided smoothly, empty. The dummy round wasn't there. She tried to release the magazine to check for spare ammunition, but when she pressed the release button, the confirmatory click never came. The entire magazine had been extracted from the weapon. Ada felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold cement floor. It wasn't a failure of ammunition. It was a deliberate act. Her memory, still clouded by shock, suddenly cleared. She vaguely remembered the sensation of strong, expert hands moving over her while she was unconscious, readjusting her makeshift bandages with the torn fabric of her trench coat. In that brief window of vulnerability, after the impact knocked her out and before he succumbed to the exhaustion of his wound, John Wick had ensured his safety. He hadn't just bandaged her to save her, he had disarmed the immediate threat to his life. It was a chess move so simple and elegant it hurt. A cold shiver ran down Ada's spine. John's foresight, his survival instinct operating even on the edge of unconsciousness, was a brutal reminder of whom she was dealing with. The Baba Yaga didn't just kill, he planned every step, even with a collapsed lung and a bleeding head. She bit her lip in anger, the empty pistol now a useless weight which she tossed silently onto a pile of debris. John Wick didn't stir, his shallow breathing remained the only sound in the stagnant air. He was so injured that not even the dry click had awakened him. Ada lay back down on the floor, returning to her original position, feeling the cold cement beneath the thin fabric of her dress. She glanced at John. The idea of trying to check if he had extra ammunition hidden in the folds of his expensive three-piece suit was unthinkable. If John was capable of disarming her with such precision while on the brink of collapse, Ada didn't dare to get closer. If, by some divine chance, he woke up and she was at that distance, she would lose. The difference between her strength and his was abysmal, and hers was compromised by the impact. There was something terrifying about the tranquility of John's shallow breathing, as if his body was only hibernating, ready to spring up at any moment and counterattack at the slightest hint of danger. Ada sat beside him, sighing. She brought a hand to the makeshift bandages John had placed on her, feeling the pressure on her skin. Well, Ada, she thought with bitter self-criticism, here you are, out of the game. To have hesitated, even for an instant, is the kind of weakness you can't afford. She forced herself to refocus, scanning the immediate surroundings of the store. The place, a former bookstore, offered scant usable cover, just piles of rotting books and fallen shelves that wouldn't stop a bullet. She checked her hip. To her surprise, everything else was in place: her grappling hook, her spy tools, the emergency knife hidden in her boot. John had only removed the P9's ammunition. A selective disarming, absolute precision. He hadn't stripped Ada of her ability to move or evade, only of her ability to kill him. A few minutes passed that felt like an eternity. The only sound was the constant dripping of water seeping through the damaged ceiling. John still seemed unconscious, submerged in a shock and pain-induced blackout. His face, usually chiseled and severe, was relaxed in an expression of vulnerability Ada never expected to see. Yet, there was nothing comforting about that peace. Ada supported herself on her elbows to stretch slightly, relieving the tension in her back and ribs. Her injuries, until now anesthetized by adrenaline, began to claim her attention. The urgency to escape intensified. She was about to fully stand up, use her grappling hook, and abandon John Wick to his fate, when a sound paralyzed her. A deep, heavy vibration resonated through the floor. It wasn't the distant roar of the burning city, but a rhythmic, nearby shake, as if a giant were marching. Plaster dust fell from the beams of the old bookstore, the shelves with the remains of books groaned in protest. Ada, who had only felt the Humvee impact, initially assumed it was the collapse of a nearby building, but the vibration grew stronger, more constant, more deliberate. Quickly, her body tense as a piano wire, she ducked and positioned herself next to John, in the deep shadow of a fallen shelf, a pool of darkness among the debris. The vibration grew, turning into slow, monstrous footsteps that stopped in the street just outside the library's front wall. Panic seized her. Ada approached John with forced silence and gave him quick, cautious pats on the cheek, then the shoulder. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible, afraid the sound would betray her to the thing outside. She couldn't afford to wake him up in a panic, fearing John would attack her by instinct or that his concussion would make him violent, but the time for caution had run out. Then, she heard it. A loud, rough breath, like a forge bellows, and the rub of wet leather. A beast with respiratory problems was just on the other side of the brick. And then, the voice, forced through a distorted, deep, almost guttural tone modulator. "John." The sound wasn't a question, it was a declaration of the hunt. Ada's hair stood on end. She looked at John, confirming what she had just heard. The thing outside was here, and it was looking for the assassin. The possibility of escape became almost irresistible. The skylight above with the hook, disappearing, and letting the bounty collect itself. It would be her perfect solution. The problem, John Wick, eliminated by a third party. But then Ada looked at her own bandages, the memory of the unbearable pain mitigated by John's quick, expert action. She frowned in anger. In her mind, she told herself, "Damn it, just because you saved me, I'll save you this time, but then I'll kill you." She told herself that, but as the creature's roar began to sound like a bulldozer hitting the outer wall, something about John's seriousness and the imminence of the danger made the promise of murder feel hollow. It was an imposed life debt, not a strategy, and for the first time, Ada hated that feeling. She was about to risk her life for a man who was worth 20 million if she let him die. The creature had stopped. The silence that followed the roar was worse than the noise. Ada crawled on her stomach across the floor, using the fallen shelves and debris as cover, to the far end of the store, where a small, high window, barely visible in the darkness, offered an oblique angle toward the street. The glass was dirty and covered in soot, but it allowed her to see without being seen. She carefully stood up, leaning against the wall. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, focusing on the silhouette projected against the orange haze of Raccoon City's polluted sky. What she saw made her swallow hard. It wasn't a person, not even a zombie in the usual grotesque sense. It was a corpulent, black mass, nearly 3 meters tall. Its body was encased in a thick leather coat that barely contained the monstrous musculature. Its head was covered by a sort of mask or bandage that only revealed a single, cruel red eye that scanned the surroundings. On its shoulder, a rotating metal structure projected the shadow of a rocket launcher. It was a bionic killing machine, armed with what looked like tentacle limbs moving under its trench coat. "What the hell?" Ada's internal voice was a whisper of professional astonishment. "What the hell is that thing? It's too much. If this finds me, not all my training will save me." The monster, Nemesis, slowly turned its massive body, the vibration of its movement reaching even Ada's fingers through the cement. The single red eye paused, as if searching for a heat signature or a specific smell. It was too close to the bookstore. Time. I need time, and I have no bullets, Ada reasoned. If it finds me here, not only will I die, but John will die too. The only option is to redirect the target, give it a lure that activates that artificial hunting instinct and draws it far enough away for me to drag John to safety. She looked at John, who remained unconscious. He was too heavy, too injured to move silently through the back door. Her gaze shifted to her utility belt. She had a high-powered flare and the grappling hook. The flare could mimic the signature of an activated weapon or create an intense light to attract nemesis. Quickly, she grabbed the grappling hook. She unrolled the steel cable silently and tied it to the magnesium flare. She couldn't risk using the hook to climb herself, she needed all the distance possible. She inhaled deeply, stabilizing her nerves. Nemesis's forced breathing was now a constant bellows sound. If John wakes up and sees me trying to abandon him, I won't be able to use him later. But if this thing finds us both here, it will rip my spine out, Ada thought, the decision made. Damn it, the devil I know and the monster I just saw. I guess for now, John is still the best option for long-term survival. With a quick motion, she used the hook not to ascend, but to launch it with surgical precision toward the skylight of an uninhabited building on the adjacent street. The hook flew in a low, silent arc before snagging on the edge of a zinc roof. She tugged gently, ensuring the flare was ready. Nemesis hadn't moved, but the red eye was still scanning. With a silent kick, Ada broke a small, loose wooden panel near the floor, a dry noise in the stillness. Nemesis immediately turned its head. In that microsecond, Ada ignited the flare and pulled the cable with all her strength. The magnesium projectile flew through the air, igniting as it released from the cable, and landed with a loud clank against the metal roof 50 meters away. A blinding white light burst out, followed by dense smoke that quickly rose. Nemesis emitted an unmistakable engine-like roar. Its head, with the single eye, swiveled to track the signal. The heavy steps resumed, heading towards the blinding light. Ada took a breath of relief. That monster was engaged and moving away. Time to move the prize, John Wick, she muttered, turning back to John's unconscious body. Playtime was over. She knelt beside him and grabbed his ballistic vest to try and drag him. The result was nil. John Wick was a dead weight of solid rock. His Kevlar suit, hidden arsenal, and the sheer muscle density of a man who had spent half his life in brutal combat made him an impossible burden. She pulled again, straining her back muscles, feeling the stab of her own broken ribs in protest. She only managed to slide him about 8 inches. No, he's too heavy, Ada gasped, a thin layer of cold sweat forming on her forehead. Her breathing quickened. I'm compromised, injured, and my window of opportunity is closing. I can't drag 200 pounds of unconscious assassin through the debris to the back door. I need him to move himself, even if only for a few feet. She tried a different technique, wrapping a piece of fabric around his torso and pulling with her back, using her weight as a counterbalance. The rub of John's suit against the cement made a dull, squeaking sound. She moved him perhaps another foot, but the effort made her see stars for a second. The pain in her bruised torso was piercing, a warning that any physical exertion beyond this could send her into unconsciousness too. She stopped, resting her head on her knees, gasping in the darkness as she listened to the mechanical, increasingly distant roar of Nemesis. Absurd, she told herself with silent rage, wiping a bead of cold sweat from her temple. I've moved heavier assets than this, but never in a state of exhaustion and constant pain. Frustration was an acidic taste in her mouth. John's immobility was a mockery of her ability. Determined, she abandoned brute force and opted for stimulation. She approached John and gave him light slaps on the cheek, gentle, trying to elicit a minimal reaction. John, wake up, she called in a firm voice, then with impatience. Come on, Wick, this is no time for naps. She assessed the depth of the shock. His eyes were closed, but his reflexes were slow, almost non-existent. His lips were slightly parted, and the paleness of his skin beneath the dirt was worrying. There was no response. His face was too pale, the unconsciousness was too deep. With a chill of alarm, Ada moved to his side, her lips pressed together. It had to be painful. It had to be immediate. She leaned down, joined her knuckles, and pressed them with considerable force into the center of John's sternum. The sternal rub was a first aid technique designed to inflict intense pain and elicit a response from an unconscious patient. It was the last resort before desperation. Ada pressed firmly, ignoring her own pain and focusing all her determination. Nemesis was distracting itself with the flare, but that trick wouldn't last more than a minute. She could feel the hardness of the bone under the pressure of her knuckles, a point of pure pain. The instant her knuckles reached the pressure point, the effect was immediate and brutal. John Wick didn't open his eyes slowly. He woke up with a jolt. It was an explosion of instinct. The pain forced a primal reflex. His left hand, with the speed of a projectile that defied his injured state, shot out from under his vest and gripped Ada's wrist with an inhuman crushing strength, pinning it against his chest. At the same time, his other hand sought the hidden weapon in his lower back. In less than half a second, his suppressed P-30L pistol was at her temple, the cold metal pressing with terrifying firmness. His eyes, now open, registered no recognition, only the cold, murderous intensity of survival. Fear hit Ada like an icy gust. She was trapped, her hand still on his chest, forced to inflict the pain that had awakened him. Instinct had instantly converted her into the threat. "John, it's me," Ada hissed, adrenaline surging like a wildfire. The tone was urgent, not flirtatious, the only way to breach the wall of pure instinct that John Wick had become. John blinked slowly, once. His breathing, initially a hoarse gasp, began to calm, becoming slower and more controlled. The fog of shock dissipated, revealing the landscape of pain in his own body and the face of Ada Wong, trapped under the barrel of his pistol. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, John lowered the barrel. The gun remained in his hand, but the muzzle no longer pointed at her head, but at the floor between them. However, his grip on Ada's wrist did not loosen. She was still the closest threat. His voice was a rough whisper, full of the irritation of physical pain and reflective terror. What happened?" Ada felt immediate, albeit partial, relief. Her wrist, still imprisoned, throbbed. "It found us. The monster. The one that attacked us in the Humvee. It's in the street. I distracted it, but it will come back," she said, noticing how the grip on her wrist became less crushing, more inquisitive. Ada felt a chill remembering the distorted sound. "He said your name, John." John paused. His gaze momentarily darted to the front wall, then returned to Ada's expression, searching for the truth in her eyes. The echo of the modulated voice resonated in his memory, overlaying Jill's warning from hours ago. "A monster, one that knows your name." Nemesis wasn't a random zombie, it was a targeted tracker. A job. With an almost imperceptible sigh that moved the stale air, John released Ada's wrist. Relief washed over her. "Apologies," John said, his voice deep and flat, returning to the controlled calm that defined him, although there was still a palpable tension in his jaw. He was referring to his reflexive attempt to kill her. "It's something I can't control. It's a protocol." Ada rubbed her wrist, assessing the bruise that would soon form. She nodded, her own face reflecting a professional understanding. "I understand. I have protocols, too." "No problem, Wick." John, now fully awake, moved, feeling the piercing pain in his ribs and the throbbing in his head. He looked around. The floor, the debris. It wasn't where he had collapsed. He glanced at Ada. "You moved me by yourself, didn't you?" Ada couldn't help a grimace of frustration, mixed with pride despite her injury. "Yes, and you weigh as much as a Fiat from the 80s. Next time, be a more cooperative asset," Ada retorted, with a sarcastic tone that attempted to lighten the tension. John, humorless, began to rise. He ignored the stabbing pain in his broken ribs and stood up, using the sheer muscle of his arm to push himself against the cement wall. He stopped short. His eyes, trained to notice the smallest detail, focused on a point. A small red light, a dot that danced on the brick wall, just behind Ada's head, piercing the suspended dust. It wasn't the flicker of a flashlight or the reflection of a fire. It was a targeting laser. And it was steadying. John didn't need a second thought. He spun sharply, rising fully, ignoring the persistent pain. He saw the creature's shadow silhouetted against the orange haze of the street. Nemesis had already ignored the flare and was back, standing in front of the bookstore. Its single red eye glowed, and over its shoulder, the rotating rocket launcher was pointing directly at the spot where Ada was sitting. Time froze. "Down," John roared, his voice pure urgency, as he pushed Ada with sudden, savage force. The push was a controlled, brutal impact. Ada, who was sitting, had no time to react. She was thrown forward, sliding across the floor. In a split second, John interposed himself between her and the wall, falling on her. He didn't embrace her gently. He covered her out of pure instinct, his heavy armored suit serving as the only possible shield between the explosive and the spy's more vulnerable body. John's body closed around Adis on the floor, his face pressed against her neck, the wool and Kevlar suit a forced embrace in the darkness. She inhaled the scent of gunpowder and old leather that enveloped him, and felt the dull thud of his bruised chest against her ribs. In that intimate, unexpected contact, Ada's mind, for a moment, froze. Only seconds earlier, she had considered the idea of killing him for a bounty. Now, the man whose body was her ticket out, and also her target, had become her refuge. The contrast was so violent it gave her a shiver, but there was no time for irony. A second later, the rocket launcher fired. The roar was deafening, the air fractured. The projectile impacted the brick right where they had been moments ago. The bookstore turned into a cauldron. The blinding white heat of the explosion penetrated the wall in a destructive flash. Concrete and brick exploded in a cloud of debris. John and Ada were engulfed by the shockwave. She felt the crushing pressure of the expelled air, the sound of her own eardrum struggling, and the weight of John Wick, that solid rock, cushioning the most lethal impact. The sonic pressure dissipated, leaving behind a silence broken by the creaking of beams giving way and a sharp ringing in their ears. John rose with a grunt, his hand brought to his right ear from which a thread of warm blood trickled, proof of the projectile's proximity. He didn't hesitate. His gaze immediately went to Ada, who was trying to sit up on her own. Without losing a millisecond, he grabbed her hand. The grip was a command. He pulled her off the ground with mechanical speed, ignoring the pain tearing through his torso. Ada regained her footing, feeling the dull thrumming of the explosion in the center of her skull. Before she could process the adrenaline, John had already reached into a hidden pocket of his suit. He pulled out a P9 pistol magazine and pressed it into Ada's hand. "This is yours," John said, his voice slightly muffled by auditory trauma, but completely firm. Ada, without a word, nodded. The silent transaction was more eloquent than any apology or thanks. She retrieved her empty P9 from the debris and, with the familiarity of constant practice, inserted the cartridge, hearing the satisfying click that put her back in the game. John turned toward the smoking hole in the wall, a jagged gap where the rocket had detonated. Through the thick dust that still swirled, he saw the monumental silhouette of Nemesis. The monster was walking with quick, determined strides, its red eye fixed on the remains of the store, as the hydraulic mechanism on its shoulder emitted a clack-clack-clack sound while loading another missile into the rocket launcher. How does that monster have so many missiles? John cursed aloud, a rare display of genuine frustration. There was no time for ballistic analysis. The second projectile would mean the total collapse of the building. John headed toward the opening with quick strides, jumping over a pile of charred books. Ada followed closely. They exited onto the main street. The night air was a soup of smoke and ash. "Where are we going?" Ada asked, her weapon already ready. "I have no idea," John replied, as his gaze quickly scanned the horizon for any cover or escape route that didn't end in a dead end. Then, his face darkened. "But first we have to deal with the pursuit so we can think." They moved between overturned cars and bus carcasses, but their rapid movements drew attention. Ahead, a group of infected were finishing devouring the remains of a police car. Sensing the movement, the zombies lifted their putrefied heads, their white eyes turning in the darkness. John swore under his breath. If they started shooting to clear the path of infected, the sound of the gunfire would attract Nemesis, who was already less than 100 meters away. Facing the behemoth with a rocket launcher and a dozen undead at the same time would be their end. They were at a lethal crossroads. It was Ada who broke the impasse, speaking with surprising calm, as if discussing a change of strategy in a poker game. "I have a grappling gun. It can lift us, but I can't lift your weight with my ribs. You have to use it. I'll hold on to you." Rooftop of the building on the right. "It's the only way to avoid the street." John stopped just long enough for Ada to take the grappling gun from her trench coat and toss it to him. He caught it in the air. The tool felt light and strange in his hands, more a toy than a weapon, and for a moment, John, the master of all weaponry, looked like a novice holding a high-tech gadget. "You aim the anchor at a fixed point on the rooftop, fire, and press the retraction button. Don't let go," Ada said quickly, positioning herself behind John, ready for the ascent. John heard the final click in his mind. He drew his suppressed P30L and, without stopping his movement, fired a controlled burst. PFF'd, PFF'd, PFF'd. 3 silent shots took down the nearest infected who were approaching dangerously. At that moment, the ground began to tremble with a familiar intensity. The heavy, methodical stumbling of Nemesis echoed down the street. It was no longer walking, it was jogging. It was approaching rapidly. Now, John, quick, Ada urged. John aimed the hook at the edge of the nearest office building. It was a difficult shot, fast, and under duress. He pressed the trigger. The anchor shot out with a pressurized hiss, the high-strength cable unspooling behind it as the hook fixed itself with a satisfying sound of metal on stone. Instantly, Ada launched herself onto John, wrapping her arms and legs around him, hugging him tightly with her face hidden in the wide back of his suit, a necessary position for her safety. John pressed the retraction button. The grappling gun, powered by a potent motor, pulled them upward with violent force. The speed was blinding. The ascent was abrupt and uncontrolled, a vertical jolt. John's little experience with the device was evident. He didn't regulate the retraction speed, and the cable shot them up with maximum force. They nearly crashed into the edge of the 10-story rooftop. In that critical moment, Ada, her face tense with concentration, stretched out a hand and struck the side control dial of the gun in John's hand. The cable's speed abruptly reduced, stopping their momentum just in time. She used the remaining impulse to swing slightly and push both of them onto the landing. They landed on the rooftop with a dull thud, both gasping, adrenaline burning every fiber of their bodies. Ada separated from John, completely frustrated. "I am never giving you that gun again," she snapped, straightening her dress. John, catching his breath as he heard the furious roar and the impact of another missile detonating far below, smiled with dry sarcasm. And the explanation was very intuitive, considering I was fleeing a beast with a rocket launcher. John immediately crouched, seeking cover behind the edge of the rooftop parapet, and Ada instinctively followed him. "Tell me you have something that tells us where that enforcer is," John whispered. Ada slid her hand inside her trench coat and pulled out a small, compact hand mirror, with a polished mother-of-pearl back. "What's mine, I always keep. A useful tool, I don't doubt it." John took the mirror, sliding it barely over the edge of the building. The angle allowed him a clear view of the street below. He watched Nemesis burst into the space where they had been moments ago. The air around the monster seemed to vibrate with pure fury, the rocket launcher resting on its shoulder like punishment ready to be delivered. "Ah, look who just showed up," John muttered, his mouth curving into a grim smile. "Mr. Missiles has come to say goodbye." Ada let out a small laugh, a surprised, amused puff of air. It was momentary relief, a surreal pause in the midst of horror. But John's smile froze. What happened next was a horror that surpassed Nemesis's standard brutality. The creature approached the group of infected John had taken down moments before. From its body, specifically from its hands and mouth, a viscous mass of pale, thick tentacles shot out. The appendages plunged with surgical precision into the back of the zombies' skulls. Upon retracting, the head of each infected exploded, replaced by a pulsating tangle of dark red parasitic tentacles. The new infected weren't the same. They moved with terrifying speed and brutal coordination, spreading through the area. John cursed, the sound rough and low. "It's a plague control. It doesn't just use weapons, it also uses soldiers," he murmured, his strategist mind processing the new, dangerous dimension of the threat. Nemesis was a commander, not just a brute. As John watched, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold night. Nemesis's gigantic head moved with spasmodic movements, like an optical scanner. And then, for an impossible microsecond, the monster's red gaze directed itself through the mirror's reflection, fixing directly on John. John pulled the mirror back with animal quickness. "It's impossible it saw me. How the hell is that possible?" "I don't know, John," Ada replied, her voice tinged with disbelief, her hand already reaching for the grip of her P9. "But I don't like it at all." John carefully peered out with the mirror again. Nemesis was no longer moving. It was still, and its red fusion eye was looking directly at the rooftop, the rocket launcher already adjusting on its shoulder, the barrel elevating at a precise angle. "It saw us," John confirmed softly, lowering the mirror, the cold, precise knowledge of their compromised position once again sinking in. Ada was ready to run, but John didn't move. She stared at him, confused. "What are you going to do?" she asked. John watched the mirror for a moment longer. The image of Nemesis preparing to attack was not a death sentence, but an opportunity. "Counterattack," he said simply. He unbuckled his belt, pulling out 2 fragmentation grenades, the last ones left in his emergency kit. Ada immediately recognized the plan. the only way to neutralize the covering fire of a rocket launcher was to attack the shooter before he fired. John rose in a fluid movement, boldly exposing himself. He looked directly at Nemesis, who already had its finger on the trigger. The rocket began to ignite in the barrel. John didn't hesitate. With the speed and precision of a professional baseball pitcher, he launched the 2 grenades, one after the other, directly at the beast's position. Just as the grenades fell on the asphalt at Nemesis's feet, the monster fired. John was already moving. He threw himself sideways, rolling behind a ventilation duct. The 2 missiles passed over the rooftop with a thunderous whistle, narrowly missing and veering into the sky. Seconds later, 2 loud explosions resonated in the street, the sound of the grenades detonating at the monster's feet. Ada watched the counterattack, the bold, suicidal maneuver. She was impressed. She would have chosen escape, but John chose confrontation as cover. "We have to go now," John said, getting up quickly, without looking back, knowing that wouldn't stop it, only slow it down. Ada followed him, her mind already in escape mode. "How do you plan to proceed?" she asked as they ran. John looked at a building about 50 meters away, across an abyss of dark rooftops. "Does your gun reach that far?" Ada frowned, remembering John's novice maneuver earlier. "Yes, but, don't worry, I'll do it right this time," John said. Ada, seeing the black smoke and fury rising from the street, nodded with resignation. "Yes, it reaches. But John, regulate the cable speed, for God's sake. I don't want you hugging me that tight again." John took the gun again, his eyes fixed on the anchor point. Ada repositioned herself, hugging him tightly. John pressed the hook, and this time, the ascent was controlled, the speed perfectly modulated. They glided across the void like a shadow. Upon reaching the edge of the new building, Ada detached herself from him. "Don't get used to that, John," she said playfully, as she straightened her scarlet dress. John handed her the gun, ignoring the game. His gaze was fixed on the street, where Nemesis was already rising from the flames, its rocket launcher visibly damaged, but its dark form and its anger, intact. John turned to look at Ada, his expression now serious, without a trace of the sarcasm from a moment ago. His eyes, deep and dark, were not looking for a temporary escape, but a final solution. "We can't keep doing this," he declared, pointing his chin toward the smoke rising from the previous rooftop. "It's not about how fast we run. That thing knew exactly where we were before we moved, even through a reflection. It seems wired to track me. Every step we take isn't an escape, it's just a delay. There's going to be a point, probably in the next mile, where there will be no more rooftops, no more escapes, just a corner. And in that corner, Nemesis will be waiting for us with fresh ammunition." Ada nodded, her face becoming a map of concentration. The lightness was gone. "I agree. Running is no longer a strategy. And the tentacle thing, that thing isn't just a weapon, it's a platform for biological control. If it can reanimate the dead to help it, the numerical superiority will never be on our side." She looked directly at John, the night wind blowing through her hair. "We have to kill it here, now, or we'll never reach the hive." John narrowed his eyes. "And what's your plan, Ada? We wasted your only high-powered tool and my last 2 grenades on a distraction. Tell me what you've got." Ada smiled again, but this time it was a predator's smile, cold and calculating. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "My first impression is this. Nemesis is designed for destruction, yes, but it seems to prioritize living targets over civilian infrastructure. If my hypothesis is correct, Nemesis's ultimate goal is not to cause a total collapse of the city, but to neutralize threats and protect something. Look how it used the rocket launcher on the bookstore to kill us, but it didn't attack vital buildings. Its AI, or whatever directs that thing, might be that of a selective hunter with strict rules." She paused, ensuring John was processing every word. "The rocket launcher is damaged, you saw it. Its only other offensive weapons we know of are its fists and those tentacles. But there is a bigger target than Nemesis in this city, something that could destroy it, or at least neutralize it permanently. Something Nemesis and Umbrella would want to keep intact." "The hive," John said, understanding the concept. "No, John, the Raccoon City primary energy reactor." Ada pulled a small communicator from her belt. It was a GPS tracking device with a superimposed city map. What most people don't know is that the Umbrella R&D lab relies heavily on that very reactor. My theory, based on its size and complexity, is that Nemesis doesn't run only on an internal battery. Its weapon systems and massive locomotion likely require a constant, powerful supply or at least periodic high-power recharging. If we manage to violently cut or overload that main power source, we could, potentially, leave it completely immobilized. It's a risk, but it's the only shortcut. John listened, his military mind already breaking down the plan. That's a bomb, literally. How do we get to a reactor? And how do we cut it? We can't reach the reactor itself, it's underground and protected. But we can collapse the only above-ground supply line. We are 3 rooftops away from the electronic voltage conversion central, she pointed on the map. It's a huge substation, an easy target, but too vital for Nemesis to destroy. My hypothesis is that its programming will force it to defend it if we try to attack it, because without power, the Umbrella Lab and Nemesis itself are useless. Ada looked at the hook John was handing back to her. The plan is simple. We will use the substation as bait and a weapon. You and I are going to that central. We'll attack it with what little ammunition and explosives we have. Not to destroy it, but to force Nemesis to change its priority, from hunting us to protecting the power. And when it gets close to defend it, we'll use what you have. John frowned. What do I have? I have nothing. Ada smiled again, wilder than before. You have the only cable we have left, John. You have my grappling gun, and now you know how to use it. For this trap, the hook won't be an escape tool, it will be the conductor. We're going to use that cable, and the 500,000 volt electricity, to give Mr. Missiles a high voltage ending. John stared at her, the determination in his face belying the question he asked. Will it work? I can't think of anything else, Ada answered with complete honesty. John nodded, the gesture minimal but decisive. In the absence of a better option, the riskiest one became the only one. They prepared to move toward the electronic central. In that instant, Nemesis, whose silhouette was already rising from the smoke of the grenades in the street below, stopped. It had discarded the damaged missile launcher, and its hammer-like hands were held at its sides. Its red eyes, fixed on the rooftop, were ready for the pedestrian pursuit. But just as Nemesis was about to advance, its gigantic head turned sharply. The bionic eye reoriented itself in another direction, toward the area of the collapsed bookstore. John and Ada stopped, looking at each other with identical confusion. Why did it stop? Ada asked in an incredulous whisper. John followed the creature's gaze. In the distance, near the smoking remains of the library, a slender silhouette moved cautiously, dodging debris and fire. The way she moved, the angle of her head, the color of her clothes. John felt a cold punch of recognition in his chest. Only one person in that hell combined tactical grace with the courage to face the Raccoon City night. Jill, John murmured, barely audible. The sudden change of Nemesis's target was explained. The monster was programmed not only to eliminate him but also STARS agents. John cursed under his breath, a rough sound. Jill couldn't know about the plan, and now she was an easy target. He couldn't just let the monster, even in its damaged state, focus on her. He turned to Ada, his final decision non-negotiable. We have to go, John said, pointing his finger toward the direction where Nemesis was beginning to turn its body to head toward Jill. Ada was genuinely surprised. Go, John, that monster just gave us a golden opportunity. It's gone somewhere else. We should take advantage of the distraction and run straight to the RPD. John shook his head firmly, his face like a stone mask. The person it's pursuing is a friend. And she can be our advantage. If Jill is in the area, we can use her to flank, lure Nemesis to the substation, and have another chance. But I won't leave her at the mercy of Mr. Missiles without knowing what we plan. Ada sighed, a long, guttural sound of tactical frustration. She looked at John's back, realizing the decision was already made. John Wick's loyalty had prevailed over the logic of her mission. Damn it, she muttered, nodding. All right, let's go. John moved with a renewed urgency. He headed to the edge of the building and quickly located the fire escape that ran down the exterior wall. He dropped down without thinking, using his hands and feet with astonishing speed, with Ada following closely. As they descended, John checked his ammunition. He felt his P30L and his MP5, feeling the comforting weight of both. The shotgun Kendo had given him before leaving was gone. He didn't remember the exact moment he had lost it, perhaps when the Humvee rolled over. Now they were approaching the monster they had just fled from. Ada observed John's descending figure. There was no fear in his movements, no dramatic bravery, only tremendous confidence, the certainty of a man who knows exactly what he's doing, even when heading toward an almost certain death. It was a strange feeling that Ada, the woman of total self-sufficiency, hated, the sensation that, by following John, everything could turn out all right. Chapter 31, An Unexpected Trio. September 28, Raccoon City, 9 p.m. Jill Valentine's muscles burned. Every stride on the broken asphalt was an act of pure will, fueled by fear, but channeled into professional fury. Her mind kept replaying the involuntary hiss of pain that had escaped John during their brief call. "I'm fine. I found a technical stop." She knew he was lying. She could hear it. She could hear the effort to keep calm. That thing found him. The creature that had relentlessly pursued her, the same being that screamed her name, STARS, was also screaming John's. The implication was clear and chilling. It wasn't just a monster, it was an execution machine designed for the extermination of specific targets. "Hold on, John," Jill murmured, her Beretta firmly gripped, her eyes scanning every shadow. Worry was a lead knot in her stomach. A man like John Wick was a machine of war, but Nemesis was an unstoppable biological disaster. Had he too succumbed to the horror of Raccoon City? This uncertainty drove her faster than any cry for help, feeling guilty for having left him alone. As she rounded the corner of Main Street, the urgency of her sprint froze into horror. There was only a smoking skeleton. An irregular hole, the size of a car, had been torn open in the upper wall of what had been a building, as if a meteorite of fury had crashed there. Debris was scattered for 20 meters, fragments of concrete and brick mixed with hundreds of charred books, their pages now bitter ash. A bust of a poet, strangely intact, stared at the chaos with empty eyes. The air smelled of molten metal and heavy gunpowder, a chemical cocktail of total destruction. "God, John," Jill whispered. If John had been here, he had been attacked. Could he have died, crushed under the rubble? It was a possibility she didn't want to face. The sight of the devastation confirmed the magnitude of her error in doubting the seriousness of John's injury in the call. The rage of knowing the monster had attacked her only hope mingled with fear. She moved toward the crater, feeling a cold pang of panic. Just as she was about to descend into the ruins, sublevel, she felt it. The ground trembled. A heavy, methodical trot, accelerating rapidly. The sound of a hunter who had just finished cleaning its prey, or who had just detected a new one. The sound was now as familiar as a recurring nightmare. Jill spun on her heels. And there it was, the executor, Nemesis. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive silhouette unmistakable. Its red eye lit up, blinking upon detecting her. Jill paled. Time slowed, allowing her to notice the new damage the monster had sustained. Explosion marks on its chest armor and the loss of its rocket launcher, meaning it had been in very recent combat. Nemesis raised its arms to show its armored fists. They were a silent testimony to its ability to shatter not only flesh but also armored vehicles. "Damn you," she ground out, raising the Beretta and emptying 5 bullets into the monster's head. The sound of her weapon was pathetically small against the monster's ambient roar. Bang, bang, bang. The weapon's recoil burned her wrist. Nemesis was unfazed. It casually raised an arm to shield itself, and the effect was as if the bullets were raindrops. The flesh around the wound swelled, but the dense, black skin did not break open. Then, it entered berserker mode. Its trot became a bestial stampede, its weight resounding with a violence Jill felt in her bones. The creature was pure impulse, without the need for tactics, only the certainty that its target could not escape. Jill only had an instant to react. She threw herself to the ground, spinning around, the gravel tearing at her skin. Nemesis's armored boots landed with devastating force where her head had been a second before, leaving a deep mark in the concrete. The air vibrated with the impact. She jumped up, the Beretta in hand, fear turned to adrenaline. Nemesis dodged a burning taxi and closed the distance in 2 strides. Jill fired her Beretta. The Nemesis roared. Jill saw a desperate opportunity. A UPS delivery van with its swinging rear doors open and the driver's door off its hinges. She dived toward the back of the van. Inertia dragged her across the metal floor, over empty cardboard boxes, and she smelled mold and oil. The Nemesis was only 2 meters away. She stood up inside the vehicle, running through the dim interior. Too slow, too strong. Halfway to the cab, the sound of her running was drowned out by thunder. The Nemesis did not attempt to circle the vehicle, nor did it try to open the door. It simply raised a colossal fist and smashed it through the side wall of the van with the force of a battering ram. The metal bent, screamed, and exploded in a shower of scrap and paint chips. The monster's armored fist, wrapped in leather and chains, appeared a meter from Jill, tearing an irregular hole in the side of the van. The blow destroyed the interior shelves and bent the engine like putty. The entire van tilted and groaned, the chassis on the verge of collapsing. Jill felt the rush of air and the heat of the impact, her ears ringing. She launched herself through the driver's door opening, which was already ajar, just as Nemesis's armored hand retracted and the vehicle crumpled in on itself, a mass of wrinkled, useless metal. The strength and speed of the T-Virus, combined with Umbrella's engineering, made close combat a death sentence. Jill emerged on the other side, feeling the monster's stale breath on her neck. She was cornered in the center of the avenue. The Nemesis lunged, raising both fists for a mission-ending blow. Jill stopped dead, her weapon was out of ammunition, and the monster was moving too fast for her to reload. There was no escape route. Only combat remained. With trained precision and the determination of a cornered animal, Jill drew her combat knife from her thigh, its double-edged blade gleaming under the distant firelights. "Come for me, you damn bastard," she shouted with all the strength in her lungs, ready to sell her life for the highest price in pain. The monster roared, its great gloved fist descending with 10 tons of force. Jill raised the knife, not in defense, but as a last, futile offense. She could hear the screech of the monster's internal gears, the sound of death meshing. Bang! The sound was that of a bullet impacting the right side of Nemesis's head, exactly where the skin fused with the synthetic tissue. The impact was lateral and blunt, not fatal, but enough to damage its orientation. The blow was strong enough to make the monster's head spin abruptly, interrupting its attack and diverting its fatal trajectory. The Nemesis roared, a sound of momentary rage and disorientation. It turned its body to look in the direction of the shot. Jill lowered the knife, her breathing accelerated. She saw the silhouette 20 meters away, in the entrance of a dark alley. John. He stood, in a perfect firing stance, his icy, concentrated gaze locked on the monster. He held a pistol in one hand, the P-30L, and a submachine gun in the other, an MP5, an arsenal Jill didn't know he possessed. His presence was so overwhelming a comfort that the relief almost made Jill collapse. The man who had fallen unconscious and was supposedly dying was there, fighting for her. "John," she managed to shout, her voice choked. Nemesis, his primary target, prepared to advance toward him, but its focus was slow, as if its systems were struggling against the recent damage. "Circle around. Get closer to us," John commanded, not taking his eyes off the monster. The distraction would only last a second. Us? Jill wondered, confused. Was he delirious? Who else could be with John in the midst of this madness? Just then, before Nemesis could take a step, a grappling hook shot out at full speed. The click of the tense cable was the only thing that gave away its arrival. The hook, launched from an adjoining rooftop, approached Nemesis's face dangerously. The monster, too focused on John and the agony of its wound, reacted late. The hook pierced part of Nemesis's head, right into the orbit of its right eye, shattering part of the eyeball and several of its prosthetic teeth from the gripping force of the impact. The figure on the rooftop, a woman of elegant and deadly appearance, pulled the trigger of her grappling gun. The hook, which had penetrated, churned inside Nemesis's head, causing more damage to its nervous systems. The cable vibrated, and a small electrical arc sparked where the hook's tip had perforated the organic tissue, suggesting an unusual alloy material. The monster struggled to reach the cable, but at that moment, the woman released the hook and the cable retracted back into the gun with a metallic hiss. Jill, stunned by the brutality of the tactical attack, turned to look at the shooter. It was Ada Wong, extremely beautiful, with an expression of glacial professionalism, and her red silk dress swayed in the breeze. Jill felt a chill of surprise and, yes, an unconscious frown upon seeing the woman next to John. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing her alive, it was the tactical familiarity and the implied intimacy of their coordination. "Move," Jill ordered John, his face serious. The distraction would only last a second. Nemesis was slowly getting up, his healthy arm hitting the damaged part of his head as his left eye blinked erratically. Jill, understanding the message, ran toward John and Ada. Her rescue had arrived, but she had just realized that she would not only have to fight Nemesis but also the mystery of the beautiful and dangerous woman who was with John. Tactical priority took precedence over personal confusion. She ran, but her eyes did not stray from the figure moving with unnatural lightness. Ada Wong, wrapped in her dazzling red dress, jumped from the building's ledge with a grace that defied gravity. She did not fall, but seemed to glide in the air, landing with the softness of a feline near John, her grappling gun already holstered. Nemesis, the destruction machine, remained kneeling. Its gloved hands haphazardly struck the asphalt, a spasm of fury and confusion from the sudden damage its nervous system had received. The distraction was momentary, but sufficient. John, without needing to give further instructions, set the plan in motion. He didn't speak a word, he simply turned and ran. His pace was not a sprint, but a sustained flight. Jill and Ada followed immediately, a disparate trio running at full speed through the hell of Raccoon City. They plunged into a labyrinth of dark, trash-filled alleys, leaving behind the muffled and increasingly desperate roar of Nemesis. Jill, as she navigated overturned dumpsters and rubble, couldn't help but glance sideways at the woman in red. Ada moved with spectacular fluidity, keeping pace with John effortlessly, her beautiful pale face and Asian features unperturbed. It was a hypnotic sight that made Jill frown with a mixture of professional envy and deep distrust. Who was this woman, and why was she moving next to John with such familiarity? Jill's mind, a pragmatic STARS fighter, hated the lack of data on this new player. About 100 meters from the confrontation zone, John raised a hand without turning around. Jill and Ada stopped in unison. John leaned heavily against a brick wall, his breathing ragged. For the first time, Jill noticed him touching a spot on his side, near his rib cage under his arm, where the Humvee impact had hurt him. "For now, you can stop running," John said in a voice rasped by the effort, his gaze fixed on the street they had just left. Concern overcame suspicion. Jill immediately approached, her rescue instinct above all else. "Are you okay? What happened to you?" she asked. Jill's voice was a veiled command, assessing the damage in her mind. Her professionalism did not allow for hysteria, but the sight of John leaning against the wall was something she had never seen. John, to keep Jill from being distracted, straightened up, although a slight tremor ran through his posture. He tried to put his weight on both feet but failed, subconsciously favoring the side he had touched. "It's small. I'll be fine. A scratch. Just catching my breath." "You're lying, John," Jill insisted, her voice dropping to a severe murmur. "That's not a scratch. Broken ribs. Internal damage." Ada, who had been observing the interaction with detached interest, intervened with a honeyed tone. "Valentine, John doesn't have time for medical checkups. The distraction of that monster pursuing us is ending." Jill shot Ada a fiery glance before refocusing on John. They walked at a slower pace, navigating around an overturned car. "Where are we heading, John? What's the plan now?" Jill asked, shifting her focus back to the urgency. "Ada has the solution," John replied, nodding toward the woman in red. "We're going to the Raccoon City voltage conversion power station. We need a way to stop it permanently. The idea is to hit it with a shock, something like 500,000 volts. A controlled electrocution, that should be enough to fry its system." Jill, the demolitions and tactics expert, understood instantly. It was a high-risk plan, but daring and brilliant. It would give it a definitive end, something bullets could not. Then, her eyes fell back on Ada, who had remained in elegant silence. Tension was a third member of the group. "Fine," Jill said, addressing Ada with a gravity that barely concealed her irritation. "And you, who are you and what are you doing here?" Ada turned to look at her, and a small, sardonic, and perfect smile curved her lips. The smile of someone who already knew the answer. "Oh, you're the famous Jill Valentine," she replied with unnerving calm, naming Jill without her having introduced herself. Jill stopped. Her eyes, filled with astonishment and contained fury, locked onto Ada. "How do you know my name? Do we know each other?" Ada laughed softly, a melodious, condescending sound, loaded with smugness. "Darling, who doesn't know the STARS girl? You're the only person in Raccoon City who isn't running. It's not hard to know who you are, is it? I'm Ada Wong." "A pleasure," she finished, without offering her hand. It was an empty courtesy. Jill ignored the mockery. The mystery of Ada was more irritating than any zombie. "And what is your relationship with him? How do you know John?" Ada walked closer to Jill, her tone becoming even more playful and full of double meaning, visibly enjoying the STARS agent's discomfort. She looked at John, who was walking a few steps ahead, scanning the rooftops, oblivious or indifferent to their little duel. Then she looked back at Jill with a mischievous smile, her lethal beauty shining in the gloom. Ada walked closer to Jill, her tone becoming even more playful and full of double meaning, visibly enjoying the STARS agent's discomfort. She looked at John, who was walking a few steps ahead, scanning the rooftops, oblivious or indifferent to their little duel. Then she looked back at Jill with a mischievous smile, her lethal beauty shining in the gloom. John. Oh, John, yes. We are. Ada paused dramatically, touching her chin with a finger, as if considering the perfect title to annoy Jill. Work friends, she said, the emphasis on friends, clearly implying something deeper and more personal. With a history, of course. He has a plan that interests me, and I have a lot of curiosity. You know how these things go, Valentine. We help each other. I'm surprised that a work friend in Raccoon City chooses a silk dress for an operation in this infested city, Jill retorted, her eyes scrutinizing the red fabric with professional coldness. A field operation like this requires more than glamour, if you really are a professional. Who sent you? Ada smiled, tilting her head slightly. Her tone became philosophical, as if she were debating expensive wines, not imminent death. Style doesn't have to be antithetical to efficiency, Valentine. And as for my wardrobe choice, Ada stroked the fabric with her fingertip, with a gesture full of vanity and danger. Consider this. Uniforms are for people who follow rules. I don't follow rules, Jill. My efficiency, like my dress, is obvious. It's a mockery of the situation, Jill hissed, slowing down to keep pace with Ada, their bodies almost brushing. The height difference forced Jill to look slightly up, a position she hated. To see a civilian with that level of audacity in the middle of an extermination order can only mean two things. Either you have blind faith in your tailor, or whoever sent you has a very, very murky interest in the outcome of tonight. Ada stopped walking and turned completely toward Jill, forcing her to stop too. The smile disappeared, her face hardened, her lethal beauty no longer playful, but icy. Blind faith in my tailor. Ada made a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. I assure you, my audacity is not that of a disoriented civilian, Jill. It's the confidence of someone who knows that those who dress for the mud are the ones who get stuck in it. This massacre is a game of strategy, and I play chess, not pawns on the board. And if you're interested, my murky plan is the only thing keeping your partner alive right now. John, walking a few steps ahead, stopped abruptly at the corner of an alley and turned his head, his firm voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. Less chatter, John growled, his voice firm and emotionless, ignoring the tension between the two women and pointing toward the immense structure of the power station in the distance. We're close. Focus. The monster won't take long to recover, and when it does, it will be angrier than ever. Jill shot Ada one last warning glance, a silent promise that this conversation was not over. Ada simply smiled back, an elegantly wrapped challenge. The two followed John, Jill's tactical professionalism competing with the urgent need to discover the truth behind John's beautiful and dangerous work friend. Author's note: thank you so much for your support, and I would appreciate it if you would leave your reviews so the story can reach more people. As always, thanks to Dipson Estrada for the Power Stones and SarahRise11 for leaving a positive review of the story. Chapter 32, Human Weakness. The trio skirted the outer perimeter of an abandoned warehouse. The voltage conversion electrical station, their objective and potential tomb, loomed in the distance, a somber giant through the haze of the fires. Jill's tactical professionalism was competing with the urgent need to uncover the truth behind John's beautiful and dangerous work friend. The march was not a desperate sprint, but a cautious progression. They had to cover at least 20 infested blocks, a grim dance of threat elimination. The infected streamed out of the alleys like famished shadows. The trio's work was a choreography of brutal efficiency. A zombie dragged itself from an overturned car, a low growl in its throat. John, without breaking stride, raised his suppressed P30L. The shot was a dry, precise PFUT, at the base of the skull, the body collapsing before Jill could even raise her Beretta. Two more infected, who turned at the muffled sound, were met with the blade. Ada Wong, unfazed by the effort or the blood that would stain her silk, drew a pair of butterfly knives from her hidden sheaths. The blades danced with blinding speed, a slash across the throat of the first, a quick pivot and an upward stab into the sternum of the second. It was a clean massacre, with no wasted ammunition. Impressive, Jill murmured, her police instinct disapproving of the excessive violence, but her STARS mind registering the efficiency. But if you're going to do that in your dress, I suggest an apron. Ada holstered the knives with a metallic click, wiping a small red smear with her thumb. Red dyes are stubborn, Ada replied. It only enhances the look. Whatever works for you, I guess, Jill said, shaking her head skeptically as they continued down a main street. It was then that the chaos abruptly paused. A sound, more powerful than any roar, cut the air. A deep, thunderous burr that vibrated the shattered glass in the very soul. The three took cover beneath the debris of a collapsed overpass. John raised his head and looked up at the contaminated sky, his eyes clinically registering every detail. A heavy, military-designed helicopter with no visible insignia was flying low over the city. But it wasn't carrying civilians. It was carrying cargo. Hanging from a thick cable, it transported a metal-armored container, the size of a small car and suspiciously heavy-looking. The helicopter was undoubtedly heading toward the heart of the city. "What the hell is that?" Jill asked, her initial relief at the military firepower being replaced by doubt. "A heavy helicopter, flying low, with no markings," John said, his voice low and focused. He looked at Ada. "Are they searching for civilians? Or why isn't it on the perimeter helping to evacuate? A vehicle of that caliber is too expensive a target for this kind of work." "No, that's not the mission," Ada said, her expression for the first time tinged with genuine concern. She adjusted a lock of hair, thinking, if they were looking for civilians, they'd use light units and stick to the perimeter. That armor and that route indicate a very high priority. It's not canned food. Whoever controls it wants that delivered or deployed, and they don't want anyone to identify it or anyone to escape. "A priority delivery," John murmured, his gaze still fixed on the point where the sound of the helicopter had faded. "Which means they're about to make things worse. Do you have an idea of the faction? Umbrella mercenaries or something else?" Ada shook her head, a crack of professional frustration in her usually composed voice. "The common factor is secrecy. If someone is using those kinds of resources in hot territory and without identification, the intention is to eliminate any potential witnesses. It's a faction operating in the shadows, and they don't want to leave tracks. We are potential witnesses," Jill pointed out, her heart racing at the obvious truth. Her Beretta suddenly felt small. "This isn't a rescue operation, it's a weapon deployment." John nodded, his face turning grim. The trio forced themselves to continue advancing down a partially intact avenue. The conversation had ended, leaving a sticky, silent layer of tension over the surrounding chaos. Suddenly, a totally wrecked yellow school bus, packed with infected inside, roared out of control from a side street. No one was at the wheel, the mass of bodies and the driver's dead foot on the accelerator kept it moving. "Left," John ordered, pushing Jill and Ada with calculated force. The bus passed by mere inches, the broken glass of the windshield full of distorted faces, the metal chassis howling as it slid past. The trio got up, shaking off the dust. Jill brought a hand to her chest, where her heartbeat still resonated against her ribcage. "Damn it, John, that was close," Jill said, her voice a tense thread. She gave him a quick look, a nod that was the highest form of gratitude a STARS agent could give in the field. "Thank you." Ada, for her part, brushed the dirt off her red suit, her composure returning with unnerving speed. She looked at John, checked him up and down, and gave him a calculated, yet authentic, smile of appreciation. "If I wanted a ride, all you had to do was ask, John," Ada murmured, her voice a low purr full of mischief. Though this driver was notably rude. "Good reflexes, by the way." John stood up with a fluid motion that concealed the sharp pain in his battered side. He dusted off his shoulder with disinterest, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Are you both all right?" John said, his voice barely a whisper, his tone neutral, but the question was a command. Jill nodded, a micro-expression of relief crossing her face. "I am okay, not a scratch, John," Ada replied, with a slightly mocking tone. "Looks like the bus missed its stop," John said, allowing himself his own little irony, as an almost imperceptible grimace curved his mouth, an expression of grim relief that was the closest thing to a joke he would permit. "Now, back to business." Ada chuckled, a dry, contained sound. The tension broke, replaced by renewed concentration. They resumed their march, returning to their pattern of cautious progression. A few yards away, a group of 4 men were looting an electronics store, ignoring the imminent danger. One struggled to pull a heavy television from the store as the zombies approached. A shout of panic, and the group dropped the merchandise, fleeing before 3 infected reached them and fell upon one of them. "Ah, the irony," Ada commented with a dry smile, as the sound of tearing flesh echoed behind them. "A zombie apocalypse and they're still worried about entertainment. I'd opt for canned food, but I suppose everyone has their priorities." Jill couldn't help a brief, dry snort of laughter at Ada's cynicism. The small moment of humanity, the absurd reality of the chaos, momentarily relieved the tension. The sound of the television breaking would be worth it for the symbolism alone. Jill adjusted her Beretta on her hip as they dodged an overturned shopping cart. She pointed to the structure of the electrical station that now dominated the horizon. 2 more blocks, if my mental map is correct. I'm inclined to think that man needed more bullets than TV channels. Ada retorted, her tone one of calculated disapproval, but with a spark of amusement. She looked toward the electrical station. 2 blocks, good. It's time to stop enjoying everyone else's spectacle and focus on our own. Jill absorbed the sarcasm, but her mind had already moved from the looting to the thorny issue of the woman walking beside her. Work friends. What did that mean in John's world? As he advanced, the shadowy, efficient figure silently eliminating one threat after another with his knife, Jill couldn't help but feel a pang of annoyance, not from romantic jealousy, but from the opaque and dangerous familiarity between the two of them. There was no way to fully trust Ada if she didn't understand the nature of her debt or agreement with John. So, John, Jill said, deciding to inject herself into the silent duel. What's the real story with the lady in red? She told me you're work friends. Does that mean you rented her a car, or shared a hotel room in Monaco? I need a third point of view. John, who had just shot 2 more approaching infected, holstered his weapon and sighed, the clearest sign of his annoyance at the useless chatter. It means we end up on opposite ends of the spectrum from time to time, John said, his voice a growl. She is not my responsibility. She is not my target. And she is not my friend. Ada laughed, her laugh like wind chimes. Oh, John, always so sweet. Don't believe him, Jill. We had a very interesting dinner in that hotel you mentioned. The steak was a little raw, and the ambiance was explosive. Jill felt a glimpse of connection with the assassin. I doubt it. Her concept of explosive and mine probably differ. The light moment ended as quickly as it began. The street opened into a small, gloomy square. Turning the corner, the air became dense. It seemed to be the alley where madness had found its last breath. The smell of dampness and urine mixed with the sweet, illegal aroma of burning cannabis. In the deepest shadows, the flickers of lighters revealed silhouettes devoted to hedonistic despair. 2 couples fornicated with an apathetic frenzy, ignoring the surrounding apocalypse, as if coitus were the last act of defiance before oblivion. A little further on, a solitary woman injected something into her arm, her glazed eyes reflecting the flame of her own internal burning. Everyone moved in a dance of self-destruction, where life had been reduced to the search for the most basic pleasure, ignoring the zombies crawling down the main street. Jill felt a lurch in her stomach and instantly averted her gaze. My God, Jill murmured, her face contorted with disgust. She quickly looked away, focusing on the brick wall, as if seeing the cement were preferable to the human collapse. Ada, however, paused. Her eyes scanned the scene with clinical coldness, no trace of morality, only an assessment of the desperation. A surprising, if unhygienic, way to shoot their last bolts, don't you think, John? Ada commented, her voice low and dispassionate, as if she were talking about a failed lab experiment. Then she let out a dry, humorless laugh. Humanity always opts for self-destruction, even without the aid of the T-virus. Don't look, Jill, John said, his voice flat, not giving the scene a fraction of a second of his attention. To him, they were background noise, non-lethal threats at that moment. I already looked, Jill replied, shaking her head and snapping back to reality. And now I'd like to forget. Let's keep moving. It was in that epicenter of collapsed morality that they encountered a middle-aged man, dirty and with a face contorted by madness, trembling with an old, rusty drum revolver. Seeing Jill and Ada, a look of depravity lit up his eyes. The man scanned them up and down with a slow, lascivious gaze, lingering on Ada's thighs and Jill's cleavage, a disgusting gesture of possession that made both of them feel deeply violated. Well, looks like God hasn't abandoned me after all, huh? He shouted, his voice a hoarse lament, raising the revolver. What luck I have. 2 beauties right before the end of the world. Come here, sweethearts. The man aimed at John, with an arrogance inflated by desperation. You, big guy, leave the girls and go on your way. If you don't make a move, I'll let you live. Don't interfere with my fun. Jill felt a shiver of icy rage layered over her disgust. He's the kind of garbage you hope the zombies get rid of first, Jill murmured, gripping her Beretta, but knowing that a shot from her could complicate things with an armed civilian, no matter how depraved he was. Ada, for her part, showed no amusement. Her face froze into a mask of total revulsion. Pathetic and predictable. He's a waste of air, Ada hissed, her tone devoid of sarcasm, only contempt for human weakness. John showed no emotion. His cold, expressionless face did not register the threat of the revolver pointed at his forehead or the man's perverse desire. He said nothing, not even a warning. There was no time for the games of the desperate. There was a greater threat. He simply moved. The flash of his hand was faster than comprehension. His P-30L came out of the holster, and the crack sound of the shot cut through the night. The man collapsed instantly, the bullet entering directly through the center of his forehead. The people in the alley continued their business, ignoring the death of someone just yards away. They seemed to have entered a mode of self-destructive madness. Upon witnessing John's action, Ada couldn't help but think, no doubt. No negotiation, no warnings. John's efficiency was so brutal it bordered on admiration. A seed of fascination began to take root. Any other man, whether a former government agent or a common operative, would have tried diplomacy, or maybe a non-lethal wound. They would have wasted valuable seconds on morality. But not John. He had assessed the threat, not the physical one, but the logistical one, and erased it without blinking. The man's intention to abuse them was a distraction, an unnecessary variable in the survival equation. A man of pure action, who understands the price of time in a war zone. It was a way of dealing with chaos that Ada deeply respected. Ada looked at the body with icy indifference. Good. We don't have to dodge him anymore. Jill looked at the man's body on the ground with the hole in his head. A part of her, the trained police officer, felt a pang of discomfort at the summary execution. But the other part, the survivor hardened by the hell walking beside the man who had saved her, only felt a deep disgust for what the survivor had planned. She clenched her jaw and forced herself to ignore the body. There was nothing left to do but keep walking. John gave them no time for reflection. His voice cut the silence like a whip, without raising its tone, but charged with undeniable urgency. We move. Now. The incident had frozen any further dialogue. Jill and Ada's minds, though for different reasons, were filled with silence. Jill, disturbed by the scene in the alley and John's lethal speed, walked absorbed in her thoughts, her gaze fixed on the assassin's broad back, not daring to look back. Ada, in contrast, processed the information, the logic behind John's action, the pure efficiency she admired. John had increased the pace, urging them forward with his silent presence. The electrical station loomed, large and somber, getting closer. They were only 3 or 4 blocks away. The sound that stopped them was not a rattle, nor a roar, but a brutal explosion. The side wall of a half-collapsed warehouse, right in front of them, exploded. Brick, mortar, and concrete flew in a cloud of dust that filled the street. The figure that emerged had not taken shortcuts, nor had it looked for the shortest path. It had run in a straight line through everything in its way, crushing cars and zombies alike. It was Nemesis, and he was even more enraged. His biomass mask seemed to palpitate with rage. The creature emitted its recognizable shriek, a guttural and modulated cry, aimed like a sonic missile. STARS. JOHN. Nemesis had closed the distance and found the trail. The instant its bioweapon eyes fell upon Jill and John, the creature dropped its arm. The weight of the armored modification was immense, but the monster held it with ease. Its right arm was now fused with a heavy Gatling gun, and its left shoulder held the nozzle of a flamethrower. John reacted before the creature could even aim properly. His eyes opened in a fraction of cold panic at the sight of the volume of fire. Nemesis's power was already immense. With the Gatling, it was an unstoppable destructive force. Get down, John yelled. It was the fastest move he had made in days. John lunged to the side, desperately pushing Jill and Ada. Both fell heavily to the ground, covered in dust. Where their heads had been a second before, the air was torn. The first burst from the Gatling was a deafening thunder. The high-caliber bullets struck the street with the fury of a million hammers, shattering the asphalt and pulverizing the wall behind them. The sound was a continuous roar, a saw cutting flesh and brick that made the ground vibrate. Shards of hot metal and fragments of concrete rained down on them. The volume of fire was insane, covering every possible escape route. Damn it, John muttered, his voice a growl. He crawled behind an overturned car, as bullets perforated the sheet metal as if it were tissue paper. That thing is new, Jill screamed, her Beretta useless against that level of armor and firepower. We can't stop it, it's too much, Ada exclaimed, the glamour disappearing under fear. The flamethrower ignited, covering the area with a jet of orange fire. The overturned car became a red-hot metal trap. They had to get out of cover. Nemesis advanced, the Gatling firing incessantly. The air was filled with a continuous din, a storm of metal that turned the asphalt into dust. "We can't stay here, it's going to tear us apart," Jill shouted, the roar of the weapon drowning out her voice. "Separate. Distraction fire to the optics," John ordered, his voice a bark of urgency. He knew they couldn't hurt it, but they could direct it. "Ada, left flank, find an angle. Jill, with me, right. Move." John was the first to move. He came out from the cover of the overturned car, not to flee, but to attack. His MP5 spit fire in 3-shot bursts, aimed directly at the creature's single glowing eye. The 9mm bullets bounced off the hardened biomass with useless sparks, but achieved their goal. Nemesis focused on him. The Gatling whirred, a steel monster pointing at John. "Now!" John yelled. Taking advantage of the distraction, Jill rolled towards a concrete pillar, her Beretta in hand. She fired half a dozen times at the creature's torso, a gesture more of defiance than of tactics. The projectiles didn't even scratch the surface. Ada, however, was a red phantom. She moved with inhuman fluidity, sliding through the debris to the left. Her pistol appeared in her hand. She did not aim at the armor, but at the exposed joints of the flamethrower arm. She fired twice, with surgical precision. A flash of blue sparks erupted from the shoulder joint. Nemesis's flamethrower arm twitched and fell momentarily, inert. They had briefly stopped him. "Good shot," John growled, taking advantage of the creature's second of hesitation to reload his MP5. But the victory lasted less than a second. Nemesis let out a roar of fury, not pain. The brute force of biotechnology overcame the damage. The flamethrower arm readjusted with a mechanical click. Ignoring Ada for an instant, the creature fixed its single glowing eye on John, the perceived leader. The rage seemed to override its artillery programming. Instead of firing the Gatling, it lowered the weapons and charged. It was a move of terrifying speed for something its size. The ground trembled under its footsteps. Nemesis closed the distance in an instant, its left fist, the size of an engine block, launched in a brutal arc aimed at John's head. John, who was finishing inserting the magazine, barely had time to react. There was no room for a tactical move, only pure instinct. He threw himself backward, a desperate spin that made him lose his balance. The punch passed inches from his face, the wind from the blow was so powerful it stung his cheek. The fist impacted the concrete column behind him, pulverizing it and sending a shower of debris over his back. John fell heavily, rolling to cover, his heart pounding in his throat. A second slower, a less honed reflex, and his head would have been disintegrated. The terrifying brute force was worse than bullets. The retaliation was instant and terrifying. Having missed the strike against John, Nemesis twisted its torso, its tactical programming resuming. It now focused on the threat that had damaged it, Ada. The flamethrower nozzle ignited. A torrent of liquid fire swept Ada's position. The woman lunged backward, rolling over her shoulder as the taxi she had covered behind instantly became a funeral pyre. She landed gracefully, but her cover was gone. "Damn it, it's unstoppable," Ada hissed, her face stained with soot, her composure broken by a rare display of frustration. The combined force of the three had only managed to irritate it, nothing more. Nemesis's artillery was simply too much. The monster turned its attention back to John, who was getting up, the one who moved the most, the one who gave the orders. The Gatling roared again, forcing John to retreat behind the smoking remains of the car. They were separated, outgunned, and the creature showed no signs of tiredness. Jill, desperately trying to cover John, who was moving with difficulty, attempted a flank, but Nemesis saw her. It whirled the Gatling with inhuman precision, locking her in a cone of bullets. Jill dove to the ground behind a pile of debris. The burst covered her in dust and shrapnel. Nemesis, pitilessly, stopped firing the Gatling and raised the arm with the flamethrower. The nozzle tilted, ready to burn her alive. Jill closed her eyes, feeling the imminent heat. Before John could do anything, before Nemesis's finger could squeeze the flamethrower's trigger, the world exploded once more. The sound was not the Gatling. It was the thunderous bang of a rocket launcher approaching at terminal velocity. The projectile impacted Nemesis on the back of its armor, right in the blind spot. The explosion was a devastating fireball that consumed the air. The monster was thrown through the air with brutal force, its heavy figure crashing against the concrete wall of an abandoned building, leaving a smoking crater and a deafening silence. All three, stunned, raised their heads and looked toward the rooftop from where the shot had come. There, with the rocket launcher still smoking in his hand, a brown-skinned man in military clothing and a strong South American accent yelled over the chaos. "Hey, ladies and you, the guy in the expensive suit. If you don't want to die, move." The man was none other than Carlos Oliveira. To be continued.